As long as you tell him, so he can start. Are you already streaming? And yep, he's already going. So if you just give him like a quick heads up, he can take our traffic down. This is Miss Moore.
Hi, I'm Ava. Good to meet you.
Test. Test.
All you do, these are in order. So you can just, you just left click on it. And it'll just,
Test.
oh, I got it. And then you'll just want to start. Is the boom mic on? Yeah.
Sound good? Do that?
I'm gonna get my screen.
The lemonade will help cure my problem now.
Alex back in the fold. That's what he said. He and Wesley Danson made an appointment for the second week I was on the job. And they're like, we're going to come find out what you are. And those two like interrogated me. I'm like, guys, I've already been hired. They're like, doesn't matter. That's right. Thank God. Brody. Sorry I'm late.
Good.
They're just about to get started. So.
Yeah, that's our last one. Right.
Oh, yeah. It's all good. Brody's here for cameras.
What?
Brody's going to be camera for you.
Okay.
So he's focused on the close up.
Okay. Just basically follow the person. Just like basketball yesterday. Yeah, just follow the person. Alright, I can do that.
We let him have to have it though. Depends on the moment. He's doing
be all good.
Welcome to ISP. Please keep mingling, but go through the line. We'll start pretty soon because we have 10 presenters tonight. So please help yourself. We have appetizers, desserts from Sage, but go through, find a seat, and like I said, we'll start in about 5 minutes with the students. I know that's what we want.
Thank you so much for coming out.
Pantry, so basically you just need to get the person walking off the stage, following them on the stage if they decide to walk around. And yeah, basically just get the people walking on and off the stage. I'll switch to cam 1, the live camera.
Not really. She's gotten into a number of places, but she's kind of holding out for mine.
Basically, and then once they're kind of off the stage already, then I switch to 1, and then you're gonna follow the person up to the stage. Okay.
Slides are getting live and every day. So I actually enjoy that more. I would enjoy that more because I'd be like, I'm learning with you guys.
You can kind of see, I don't know if you can see this right here.
Guess where they pick for their senior
I
trip.
kind of want it like this.
Puerto Rico. Yeah.
I want it like this whenever they're speaking.
No idea.
Maybe a little wider.
I don't know that I'm invited.
How tall the speaker is.
Yeah.
But I might have to pick your brain.
Yeah, I mean, contingent on how big the person is.
Yeah.
He mentioned that, yeah.
Like I said, follow them off the stage slowly, and then I'll go to cam 1, and then while you find the next person, stand up, then tell me you got it. And then I'll switch to you. Just tell me you got it.
Just follow from the crowd.
Yep, and then I'll switch to 1, and then I'll switch so you can focus on the person on the podium. I'll give you a second. So, yeah.
He doesn't necessarily pick them up from the crowd. He can wait at the podium or he can take the right shot. That shows more. So use her Spanish skills. So she's been working pretty hard at that
So
class.
you just want people walking through.
Yeah, when they're walking, shot, you switch back to wide until the next one.
Okay, so
This year, her Spanish teacher really doesn't speak that much any English in class. So
Yeah, you can follow
really forcing them to utilize it. So it's probably been her hardest year so far.
yeah,
Whatever.
She likes it. She wants to maintain it like that.
you did good yesterday, so I can kind of test you.
She has. I think that's definitely on her radar. And she's already brought that up that if she goes someplace where she can
Are you
use
so
that skill
nervous you
set,
can't
so,
eat? Lost an esports match.
If you want to find out, I could go eat some before I have to go over and talk and then see what happens.
Yeah, I just got 2 drummers. Free food. I'll take it.
Our director Steve has some white
Oh, some cocaine.
freaking walking with him. Yeah. So there's a number of speakers. So I just didn't want you guys to feel trapped. Yeah, she does. She does. You get to see John when he was in town. No, it just didn't work out with, they had some visitors too, so I was hoping that.
All right, good evening. Everybody hear me okay? Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Matthew Carroll, and I have the privilege of serving as the head of school. It is an honor to welcome you to the culmination of the Independent Studies program. At Heritage Hall, I often describe our students' experience as a Renaissance education, one that celebrates and promotes the arts, academics, and athletics. Tonight is a moment to celebrate the brilliance of academic achievement. Few programs embody the spirit more profoundly than our Independent Studies program. Designed for highly self-motivated, intellectually curious students who wish to delve into academic interests beyond the core curriculum, the Independent Studies program challenges students to pursue advanced scholarship and intellectual purpose with discipline and engagement. Behind each presentation lies not only a year's worth of work, but also an extensive research paper. In preparing for tonight, I was reminded of Arthur C. Brooks' recent reflections in the Atlantic, if you read that. It's written in response to Jonathan Haidt's best-selling book, The Anxious Generation, which ascribes much of today's youth anxiety to the overuse of screens and social media. A work and research probably at the heart of all the cell phone banning in the last few years. Brooks, however, offers an antidote of sorts, shifting the focus to what actually gives young people a sense of purpose. He writes that the meaning of life is a combination of coherence, purpose, and significance. Tonight, you will see each of these elements on full display. Students, I commend you on your perseverance and on choosing an area of interest with passion and intention. No matter how daunting the work has been, we have seen these projects render the very coherence, purpose, and significance Brooks mentions. I believe in his work, and I believe in his theory. I want you to remember this journey, especially the challenges, moments of doubt, and how you overcame them. The mindset you developed and the courage you discovered will likely help you reach future goals that may not have been possible without facing these obstacles. I want you to try to remember this moment next year as you prepare for your finals. The projects range from Zephy Ellenberg's The Realistic, Effective, and Affordable Benefits of Sustainable Architecture, Combating the Climate and Housing Crisis One Container at a Time, to Adam Alberini's study, The Social Emotional Effects of Social Media and Athletic Performances of Male High School Student Athletes. No matter the subject matter, the common denominator is that these students are about to shine in an extraordinary academic light. Their work inspires us all, and we are as proud of their efforts as we are of the products we are about to witness. To our incredible faculty, Mrs. McGarry, Mr. Fetro, Mr. Ford, Mr. Lyons, Dr. Lyons, Mr. Castle, Mr. Porter, Mr. Gaston, Mr. Steelman. Your expertise, dedication, and belief in your students have guided them and inspired them to realize their full potential today. You have challenged them to think critically and creatively, to explore ideas deeply, and to embrace intellectual rigor. Your mentorship has been transformative, and for that, I thank you. To our students, I see you all. Can you all take a deep breath, breathe? It's going to make it. Adam Alberini, Jonathan Carter, Zachary Davis, Zephy Ellenberg, David Griffin, Hastings Grant, Audrey Flynn, Grayson McComb, Max Smith, and Taylor Williams. Tonight is a celebration of your accomplishments, but not as an endpoint. It marks the beginning of a lifelong journey of intellectual discovery. For many of you, the ISP has already served as an on-ramp to a future course of study or potential career. By courageously embarking on this path, you've sought knowledge out of intellectual hunger. And tonight, you are our teachers. As you go forward, let your intellectual curiosity continue to guide you toward the uncharted and the challenging. Remember this moment, including the journey, and draw strength from it. Strive for the uncommon, and someday, and I believe this, you may find yourself leading efforts that illuminate the unknown, champion the forgotten, or change the world for the better. Now it is my privilege to introduce the director of the Independent Studies program, Mrs. Katie Davis. Mrs. Davis has steered this program to remarkable heights with dedication, vision, and unwavering commitment to her students. From championing your efforts to keeping you and us on track and setting a course for completion, her guidance embodies the hallmarks of an exceptional educator. We are profoundly grateful for her leadership. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mrs. Katie Davis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carolyn, for serving on the committee and supporting this program, one of many programs that will help students meet the world challenges and prepare for tomorrow. Welcome faculty members, friends, and families of the Independent Studies Scholars. Thank you to all of you who have made this evening possible, including our school administrators, the ISP committee, and the advisors. This program truly would not be possible without the mentorship, not only of the student mentors and advisors, but also people who volunteer to help students along the way. Like Dr. Thurston, when somebody has a stat question, I send them your way, or if they have a question about the program and the origins, send them to Dr. Hamill. So thank you to all of you. It's truly a group effort. I also want to thank the families here for supporting students throughout this process as you support their distinguished academic endeavor. They've truly created original research, and we really view this program as a school within a school. Tonight we will celebrate these students' persistence and creativity as they navigate the careful research process. In classrooms, education is often a one-way street. Teachers teach students, share their knowledge, students absorb it, lessons flow from the front of the room to the back. But what you'll witness today, and what the faculty has had the privilege to see throughout this whole process, is that true learning doesn't stay one-directional. Real education is circular. It begins with teaching, grows through learning, and comes to life when students begin to teach the teachers, which is what you'll do tonight. Each of these projects represents that moment when curiosity and effort transform into discovery, and when students contribute something original to our shared understanding of the world. At our school, we believe that if students are allowed and encouraged to pursue an interest in depth, such learning will naturally lead to deeper understanding and discovery. Oftentimes, good education leads to more questions than answers, and it takes courage to ask the right questions. Each of the students here today has asked a question that matters, one that simply can't be searched on Google, a question that will make a difference in this ever-changing world. Today, you'll hear from some of our most inspiring students about topics ranging from sustainable housing to the effects of social media on athletes. Taken together, these projects reflect the depth and purpose of education at its best. They show that knowledge isn't something we simply pass down, it's something we build together, which is what we've done in this program. So to our students, thank you for teaching us. I think all of you will be impressed with what they've learned and what they teach you tonight. Thank you for reminding us that learning is alive, that ideas evolve, and that education's truest measure isn't in the answers we give, but instead the questions we ask. Congratulations on reaching this moment. Before I ask our first mentor, Mrs. McGarry, who's also college counselor, to come to the stage, I want to tell you, please go through the line as much as possible. Students are used to chaos being in the high school, so don't feel bad to get up or go get more food. Sage has catered tonight, which I appreciate, so feel free to get up. We'll also have a brief intermission between students so you can get more food then. And then I also invite you to attend David Griffin, who's coming from football practice. We believe in a well-rounded scholar, so if he comes in late or in a football uniform, he's not in trouble, but he's coming from practice, but he has an art gallery that he and Mr. Lyons have worked on. So at intermission, you're invited to go to the art gallery and see his portraits, or you can go after we complete the presentations. But like I said, feel free to get up, be disruptive, make yourself comfortable. I'll now invite Ms. McGarry on stage. She and Zephy are saving the planet, so I'm excited to hear what they have to share.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. Self-confident, resilient, engaging, and talented. These are just a few words that come to mind when describing Elizabeth Zephy Ellenberg, a student who embodies excellence in every space she enters. Over the past 3.5 years at Heritage Hall, Zephy has distinguished herself as a leader, scholar, and athlete, earning the respect of all as an academic scholar, fierce competitor, and trusted teammate. One of Zephy's most remarkable qualities is her passion for research. From the beginning, she envisioned her independent studies project exploring sustainable architecture, focusing on innovative approaches like green roofing. I have been so impressed by her creativity, design aspirations, and knowledge absorption over the past year. As is often the case with ambitious projects, her vision grew and evolved, presenting unexpected challenges along the way. Zephy approached every obstacle with determination and integrity, diving deeper into her subject, pivoting and revising her approach when necessary, but never losing momentum. Her final result is of such high quality that she will be able to continue developing this research for years to come. What sets Zephy apart is not just her brilliance and ambition, but her humility, loyalty, and unwavering commitment to those around her. She is the kind of young woman who lifts others as she rises, inspiring peers with her dedication, creativity, and grace. Today, I am proud to honor her remarkable journey through this program and celebrate all that she's accomplished. Thank you.
Good evening. So I have the privilege of opening the 2025 ISP banquet. So my name is Zephy Ellenberg, and my project is over the realistic, effective, and affordable benefits of sustainable architecture. But before I get too far into my topic, I have some people that I would love to thank whom this project would not be possible without. So thank you, Ms. McGarry, thank you, Ms. Moore, Mr. Sharnecko, Ms. Davis, and my 2025 ISP committee, and mom and dad, shout out. So what is my project over? So I hope to provide insight into sustainable, affordable, and easily replicable systems for the future of sustainable innovation. So we kind of need a why behind this. So I'm going to spit out some really scary statistics because I think we've all probably heard of climate change before. So this is supposed to scare you a little bit. So within the next 50 years, about 1/3 of the planet is going to feel more like the Saharan desert. Specifically in Oklahoma, by 2070, it will feel more like Sabinas, Mexico here, with days over 95 degrees, going from 37 today to 114. So we're already seeing the effects of climate change. We're already seeing our temperatures rise, our sea levels increase, we're seeing our weather patterns become more and more unpredictable. So we have sustainability, and we also have the housing crisis. So those are two massive problems. So how do they connect? Well, architectural activities account for about 1/2 of the world's energy expenditure. However, we can't just stop building buildings. That's not going to work, especially because currently in this country, we have 4.7 million homes that we have a shortage of. So the demand is for both sustainability and affordable housing. So my proposition is to combine the two. So these are two really big topics. So I needed some self-imposed constraints to help me deal with the scale of this project. So a couple ways I did this was I actually picked a real site in downtown Oklahoma City. This is a very small acreage of land, but really this was just supposed to provide me an actual size constraint to my project, and it was supposed to help me keep grounded in something that was realistic. And then I also designed an actual container house. So with my wonderful Revit coach, Miss Moore, we mocked up a CAD model of a shipping container structure. So this one in particular uses 24 used pre-insulated shipping containers. So each dwelling, which is they're like L shapes, but each one consists of a 40-foot and a 20-foot high shipping container for a total of about 480 square feet, which is about the size of a small studio apartment. So the basic structure, this was the touchstone of all of the research that I did. And we'll be revisiting it quite a bit throughout this presentation. So a huge component of this is shipping containers, so why did I choose that? There are about 17 million structurally sound shipping containers just discarded in ports worldwide. And this is because it's much cheaper for these big companies to just discard them instead of spending all the money it takes to ship them all the way back to where they came from. So this just wastes a really valuable building material because shipping containers are cheap, efficient, and versatile. They're incredibly energy efficient. It takes about 5% of the energy it takes to melt one down to just discard it than it takes to repurpose it as a home. And they're also very time efficient. They're about 40 to 60% quicker to build, and they only produce 70% of the waste that a traditional home does on site. So in terms of the housing crisis, this can help us meet the increased demand that we're having a hard time meeting. So they're also versatile because they're modular. So because they have standard sizes for all shipping containers, this means that they're not only strong for global shipping, but they can be stacked in different ways, and they lock together, so they're versatile in terms of the building material. So this is the backside of my design. So I did a bunch of research into what is the optimal way to construct one of these, and I found that 3 stories was the optimal stacking height. This is much more energy efficient in construction, and they're staggered because this allows for airflow throughout the structure, and I wanted to maximize green roofing and solar panel space on top of the structure. And speaking of solar panels, so solar panels made the most sense for the supply of energy to the structure, specifically because it's in an unobstructed parking lot, and Oklahoma ranks in the top 10% nationally for solar. So, and solar you can integrate directly onto a structure as opposed to something like wind energy, which takes up a lot of extra square footage. So I thought this was also a scalable alternative for areas that are quite urban. It's harder to implement wind in those places, so solar could be a potential option. So in terms of my project specifically, this is a top-down shot. I wanted to use monocrystalline panels, and I talk a lot more about that in my paper, but they're more efficient, and they have a quicker return on their investment, and they're more suitable for limited spaces that have a high heat index. And most people don't know this about solar, but you can actually reach 90% recycling efficiency in terms of the components, which reduces the manufacturing and production emissions. And a lot of people think that solar is very expensive, so that can help reduce the initial price. So solar panels here are placed over the green roofs. This was to take advantage of the mutual relationship between plants and solar. So there's a process called evapotranspiration that plants basically emit water as water vapor, and this reduces the ambient air temperature. And this can also reduce the solar panel temperature by about 16 degrees, which increases their productivity. So the shade also protects the plants. So this is like a mutual relationship because both parties are benefiting. And this has a broader application because there are about 900 million acres of farmland in this country. And if just 1/900th of that was covered by solar panels, we would meet our entire national energy demand, which is pretty crazy to think about. And because this is such a huge nation for agriculture, the crops are about 100 to 300% more effective when they're covered by solar. So with solar comes the need to store excess energy because solar is intermittent. And the most common method to do this is lithium batteries, but these are unsustainable. So my proposition would be to use something like a thermal energy battery because these are basically dual purpose if you use the ones that contain water. So they trap excess solar energy, but they also trap all of the heat leaving the building that's greater than 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is important because shipping containers are notorious for being super conductive. They're very hot, they emit a lot of heat because they're made of steel. So thermal batteries would take advantage of that pretty significant downside. So the way that these work is, you can see the top kind of diagram here is showing all of that heat being taken out of the structure. The water inside of that tank will be ice. So when that heat, which is energy, goes into the container, it melts the ice and stores it. And then when the dwelling needs to be heated, all of the energy is taken out of the containers and it turns back into ice and it just repeats. So these batteries have a 20 years. They have a lower investment cost compared to lithium batteries, and it's more efficient to store energy in its final form compared to lithium batteries, which store it as energy when it's supposed to be used as heat. So we're going to switch gears to water supply. There were really three main ways I could have gone about water supply here. There was municipal, well water, and rainwater. And rainwater went out pretty quick because it's hard to supply a large amount of water to a structure this big with just rainwater. So that left me with municipal and well water. But the site that I chose would make a lot more sense to run it off of municipal water because it's such an urban location. But for the theoretical, well water would be more sustainable in the long run, and municipal is still compatible with all the systems I'm proposing, but theoretically I am using well water. And this gave me an opportunity to point out some of the downsides to using municipal water. Firstly, municipal water involves a huge amount of infrastructure, and it's kind of faulty infrastructure because it wastes about 6 billion gallons of water per day. And it involves really intensive treatment processes that can harm the natural reservoirs that it's gathering water from. But if we use well water, it has a relatively small infrastructure footprint, and if you're drawing up less water, that means you're expending less energy to do so. And there's less treatment that's really intensive, and it conserves operational energy. So this is also easily, you can move it to a lot of different locations because well water can be used off-grid as well. So in terms of lowering overall water footprint, the way to do this is gray water. About 1/3 of residential water use is down to irrigation of lawns and gardens, so I would propose reusing most of the water that comes from utilities as a subsurface irrigation. This is especially beneficial in places that do use well water because if you're reusing water, that means that there's less extensive need for drilling. And it also improves ecosystems. It's a constant source of water for backyard ecosystems. It's kind of a win-win. And the most effective systems are the simplest ones, which means that you're going to spend less upfront, and they're cheaper to maintain. And they also can help use some of the natural flora of the area because that water needs to be processed by plants. So we've talked a lot about water supply, but we haven't talked a lot about drinking water. So well water still needs to be treated most of the time, and a way to do this I would propose to be PBRO. So reverse osmosis refers to forcing water through a semi-permeable membrane to filter out particulate contaminants. And the PV system refers to something that's run off of solar. So I chose to use this because it's relatively off-grid and requires very little heavy chemical usage. So you could implement this in a couple of different ways. And so I had to decide which one I really wanted to use because I could implement a bunch of small RO systems per dwelling, or I could just use one giant PBRO system like the one that's shown in the bottom corner. But for the purpose of scalability, I wanted to use a bigger system because if you're going to implement this, for example, in like a small town in a super rural area, a bigger system would make more sense than implementing a bunch of small systems. But I found that these industrial-sized units are quite expensive, so I found myself looking at a bunch of case studies to see if this was possible to do in a cost-effective manner, and there is a proof of concept. And most of the time, these large systems that are also affordable use commercially available parts and a significant amount of ingenuity, but it demonstrates a proof of concept that it can be done at this scale and cost-effectively. So one of the downsides to PBRO water is the wastewater that comes out of these systems because you're basically stripping the water of every contaminant possible. So a way to do this, I propose using the green roofs. And this takes advantage of phytoremediation capabilities of plants. So this basically describes a process in which plants can treat the environment for potential contaminants. Like they can treat everything from heavy metal exposure to explosives. So it's pretty versatile. So some plants do this by releasing water vapor back into the atmosphere. Some do this by processing it through their root systems, and some merely retain it. But basically it prevents it from leaking into the environment surrounding the area. So usually RO from wells are higher in salt concentration and sometimes heavy metal contaminants. So using the green roof would be reusing water that would normally be wasted. And it also takes advantage of local flora. So I propose using strawberry clover. And in this case, it would improve biodiversity, lower your energy consumption, your labor and equipment demand, and overall this would lower your cost expenditure for treating RO wastewater. So the benefits of green roofing do go far beyond wastewater management. One of the most crucial aspects of this for shipping container design is the ability to lower indoor and outdoor air temperature. As we talked about, they're extremely conductive, so this was kind of an important quality that I was looking for. So I found a study looking at how substrate layers affected the thermal performance of shipping containers. And I found that roofs with less than 5 inches of substrate depth had an average indoor temperature of 50 degrees in comparison to the ones that just had a green roof, or didn't have a green roof, with an elevated temperature of 102 degrees indoor temperature. Further, green roofs can lower your temperature variability and the humidity variability of the container as a whole. So this is important because it reduces the stress that's placed on your climate control systems. So that would be, in this case, things like solar and your thermal battery systems, which will help you lower your overall energy consumption and demand. So that was kind of a win-win. And the most powerful combination with green roofing is green walls. Both of these systems can lower the sound transmission between containers, which was a problem that I was looking to solve because they also amplify sound because they're made of steel. So you can actually reduce that between 5 to 20 decibels using just green roofs and green walls. And they also create microclimates. They improve biodiversity, and they provide green spaces in locations that would ordinarily be just urban environments. And both of them have potential for wider impact in terms of reducing heat island effect and reducing air pollution of big cities. And this will become increasingly important as urban densification increases. But green walls specifically do have characteristics that are beneficial just for container design. One of the problems that I was looking to solve was that there's a high amount of heat transfer between concrete slabs and the metal shipping container walls. So the substrate layer would reduce how quickly that heat is transferred upwards, which overall reduces your indoor air temperature. And it also blocks UV from the sun, so it kind of reduces the temperature of the walls entirely. So I think that implementing green architecture and developing green solutions is more important now than ever. Climate policy continues to be rolled back in favor of immediate monetary gain from fossil fuels. So the tech here is not limited to residential design, which means it has wider opportunity for application elsewhere. And the demand for housing presented in the United States, it presents us with an opportunity to make a dramatic change towards green development. And this opportunity is overwhelming, but it will take a reevaluation of national values to unlock this potential. And it's not too late to change the trajectory of global warming, but a leap of faith must be made. So thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I would like to stand up here and tell you some deep and meaningful story about the connections that brought Max and I together around his ISP project. I would be making up a story if I did that. When Max first approached me, I told him that my law practice concentrated on employment law, but my office was on the same floor as some of my firm's intellectual property attorneys, and that was really my extent of patent law. Max thought that was fine. The reality is this: Max and I are both pretty simple guys. I'm a lawyer, and I have a BMW. Max wants to be a lawyer, and he has a BMW. An ISP project and partnership is born. While all of that is true, I have truly enjoyed Max opening my eyes. As Mr. Carolyn pointed out, we are learning in this process. Max opening my eyes to some of the intricacies of turbochargers, BMW engine technology, and also providing me with a much deeper dive into patent law than I received when visiting the offices of my old friends and colleagues. Great work, my friend. Ladies and gentlemen, Max Smith.
All right, here we go. We're finally here. Some of us didn't think we'd make it, but we are.
all for being here. First off, it means a lot to us. We have spent a lot of time working on this, and it's not all been fun, but this makes it worth it. So I appreciate you guys all being here. I have the privilege tonight of sharing my project over patent law and how it protects the development of turbochargers, specifically BMW. And a lot of this is pieces coming together as it was going. Being so into cars comes from my dad, and he had several BMWs while I was growing up. One of them went through more turbochargers than cars that he's ever owned. So that was a fun experience. Also, like Mr. Fetcher said, I do want to be a lawyer eventually. So this was a perfect combination of my interest and my aspirations, and now I get to share it with you guys. So a couple of small things. For me, this is very interesting. It's one of my passions. If my car gets another check engine light, which it probably will, I want to know a little bit more about what I can do, if I can do anything. But for everyone else, knowledge is power, and it's about being exclusive. You want more knowledge, you need to be able to present on all matters. So specifically for me, BMW, they file about 1,500 to 1,800 patents a year. So that means that there's a lot more coming that we don't know. There's new technology, there's new developments, and that's exciting for anybody that's into cars. So I found that out through several methods of research. In my actual thesis, I have about 45 different patents, but I will spare you that long amount of time of research. I'll just keep it simple for you. So I had to go through a lot of patent offices. BMW being a German company, I had to focus on a lot of European patents, German patents. I learned how to not read German and skip to the graphs that looked cool. So there was a lot of that. A lot of my data was just reading patents, figuring out how to find what I needed, but I did have to do quite a bit of contextual stuff. And that was a lot of really boring books, so I went back to not reading German and finding more pictures, because pictures are helpful. So what do you do if you have an idea? You want to create a patent. Obviously, you think you have the next iPhone. You got to go find out if someone else has thought about that. You got to make sure there's nothing similar, any pieces of the product that are similar. And then once you've done that, you're going to apply for it to become a thing. So you got to go back and forth with the patent office. They're going to keep saying, no, someone's already made this. You're not as smart as you thought you were. You're going to keep going back and forth, and eventually they'll keep rejecting it, or they'll say, you know what, you got it, we're allowing it. If they keep rejecting it, you do have the ability to appeal, which is just more money and more time. Once you do that, you get approved. Now you have a patent. Now you got to start making money. That's not for me to worry about. You guys are the next Jeff Bezos. Have fun with that. So specifically focusing on turbochargers, BMW from 2012 to 2024 has filed 62% more patents on turbochargers than from when they started to 2012. So that means that there are a lot more forced induction cars coming. There's going to be a lot more turbocharged cars coming. And it's not just BMW, it's all cars. And I'll get into why that's good, how it's efficient, and it helps us. But also, it's just about ingenuity. BMW, other companies, everybody wants to excel. They want to be better. And I learned a lot about that while I was going through this. It wasn't specifically about turbochargers and BMW. It was about how everyone is just pursuing getting better, pursuing doing more. So some different ways that BMW has had to fight other companies who think that they can just copy the products and create all these new ideas. We got three kinds that I'm going to focus on infringement. We have direct infringement, which is when every single element of the patent is the exact same as the product that another company made. That's obviously not allowed, because if BMW made an integrated exhaust manifold where the turbocharger is mounted on the exhaust manifold, and another company, like a Chinese aftermarket manufacturer, decides to build the exact same thing with the exact same parts and say that it's genuine when it's not. You're not allowed to do that, and that's literal infringement because every single component is the exact same. And so another type of direct infringement that's just slightly different is when they change a few pieces here and there. They make it look just slightly different, but it does the exact same thing. So when you're stuck with a product that just looks a little different, you think you can get away with it, but it does the same thing, that's equivalence infringement. That's a whole nother process. You're not allowed to just change a couple of pieces here and there and say it's all good. So this specifically right here is a valveless system. Basically, it's gonna keep pieces that go when you press your gas. It's gonna keep them moving at all times, so when you press your gas, it's quicker, you're ready to go. So a company in Michigan decided to create this piece right here. They said that it was better, that BMW didn't make it as well, but it was the same thing. And so that's when BMW filed to get it dismissed, and they did succeed on that. It was, distribution was blocked within the US. And so, a little bit different kind, also a Michigan issue. Indirect infringement is when a company or a party creates a product or a tool to help infringe on another patent. So another Michigan company created a product and sold it that would hack and bypass a BMW computer, the central computer. The central computer on a BMW is patented, everything within that is patented. So you created a device to help break a patented product. So BMW had to do the same thing. They issued a takedown demand, and production was stopped. So a lot of this is interesting to me. It's something I want to pursue eventually. But for you guys, if you're into cars, you're not into cars, it's just good to know what's coming in the future so you can be prepared. BMW's been filing tons of hydrogen fuel cell patents, meaning that new technology focusing on greener innovation, more environmentally friendly devices, it's coming. Don't know when, don't know how, but if you want to read through tons of patents, be my guest, because I'm done with it. So it's just about knowing what's to come, and if you are into it, I have 20 more pages just like this that you guys can all read. So that's it for mine. Thank you, Mr. Vetro, for taking this on with me. Thank you, Ms. Davis, for trying to keep us all on track when we need it. Thank you to the ISP committee, the Heritage Hall faculty. Thank you to my family and friends for telling me I gotta do this when I don't want to do it. So I appreciate you guys.
So I think one theme that all these presentations end up following is that they have to grow and evolve and change over the course of the year. And there's always some sort of situation that usually comes from a class or something that snags someone's interest and then makes them ask a favorite question, and off you go to the races with the evolution process. I can't take credit for this one. I think that one probably has to go to Mark Brown when you might look at our bacteria. That's usually people's interest, their starting point into microbiology. And as soon as you start going down that road, you run into some very reasonable limitations. We don't really want to be studying antibiotics and disease within a high school where we try and keep sick people at home. Okay, so you run into some limitations right off the bat, and you end up taking those skills that you learn in high school, growing bacteria on a plate, and taking them one step further, as far as you can, And then you start reading and becoming an expert in learning a new language and something that you didn't really even know existed at that point. And I think that's, in the last couple months, what you start seeing in the students as they're putting together these papers and these presentations at the end is that they've taken the time to learn a whole new language that in these presentations will sound foreign to a lot of people in the audience, but when you go to an American Microbiology Society presentation, a conference or something like that, this is the fun talk that you're about to get. So I hope you enjoy Ms. Flynn's presentation on antibiotics and the dangers of their misuse.
Studying the dangers of the misuse of antibiotics. Like Mr. Ford said, I did get into this in my sophomore year AP biology class, and it was kind of concerning because if a bunch of 15 and 16-year-old people who don't know what they're doing and have halfway read the lab instructions can grow resistant colonies, what can we do without knowing? So my central research question was, what are the dangers of antibiotic misuse and how has this misuse affected us? So before I get into it, there's a couple definitions that I have to outline, otherwise nothing I'm going to say is going to make sense. So first, I'm outlining misuse as stopping a course of antibiotics earlier than prescribed, using antibiotics without a prescription or for non-bacterial illnesses, or continuing a course longer than prescribed. And this can also apply to when doctors misprescribe you, because even though you don't know it, you're still not using antibiotics correctly. I've also read a few accounts of people keeping leftover antibiotics in their fridge and handing them out to their friends when they don't feel well. Also misuse. So then my second definition is horizontal gene transfer, or HGT. So this is the movement of genetic information between organisms. So what happens with bacteria is that we have these, they have circular units of DNA called plasmids. And these plasmids contain genes. And so these genes can get mutations, which are changes in the sequences of DNA. And so these mutations can then code for antibiotic resistance. And so these plasmids can then be transferred from one bacterium to another. And then both bacterium will carry the resistance gene. Now this happens a lot faster than how bacteria can replicate, which is why it's so concerning. So the introduction, why do we care at all? It's a growing problem in the US and worldwide. When I first brought this topic home to my mom, she would tell me how every time I left the doctor's office when I was younger, I'd be leaving with antibiotics, and we just keep seeing this, and we've seen a growing number of cases of resistance. It also affects the cost of healthcare, which is a pretty big deal in a country where it already costs $14,000 a year per person. And then it also makes simple infections harder to treat and more life-threatening, and this is the most concerning of all. But my thesis was that the misuse of antibiotics facilitates genetic adaptations, such as horizontal gene transfer or natural selection in bacteria, ultimately contributing to the rise of multi-drug resistant superbugs. So I found this graphic from one of the articles I read, and I thought it outlined everything really well. So the patterns we see will disproportionately affect the low and middle income in developing countries. Inappropriate prescriptions, for example, a lot of the times happen in overcrowded and understaffed healthcare systems where doctors don't have as much time with patients as they would like. This means they don't get to take as much of a detailed history, and oftentimes they also don't have access to the same resources and testing that we do. And when we couple this with patient expectations, where you don't want a patient to leave empty-handed, and patients can kind of see antibiotics as a cure-all, a lot of the times they'll leave with an antibiotic prescription when they don't need one. Again, we'll see self-medication in low and middle income and developing countries because they don't have the same rules and regulations that the more developed countries, such as the US, have. They just don't have the same resources and time to be putting into watching all of this stuff. So that means they can typically go into the drugstore and just buy whatever antibiotic they need over the counter. And this is a problem because most people are not doctors and they do not know how to diagnose themselves, and so they'll end up taking antibiotics for something that does not need antibiotics, like a viral infection, and it will do nothing. They also don't know how to prescribe for long enough times, so they'll either do it for too long or not enough time and not end up killing off all of their bacteria. We can also be exposed to antibiotics through agriculture. Agriculture. When farmers feed their chickens antibiotics and then we're exposed to those same antibiotics when we don't need them. And so then we see sociocultural and economic factors, kind of like the ones I just listed, where it is a disproportionate blow on those lower income countries. So the consequences are accelerated development of resistance. So it happens exponentially, and as one bacterium can get resistance, it'll spread that through HGT, and it happens really quickly, and it spreads really quickly.
Also increased healthcare costs. The alternative medications are typically more expensive and require longer hospital stays. There's an impact on global health where we're less prepared for global health crises. And then there's also a decreased effectiveness of treatments where it can take longer for those treatments to work and they're not as effective because they're not the standard treatment, like the standards are standards for a reason. So then the strategies I'll talk a little bit more about at the end, but we really just need to have more rules and regulations and education on the topic. So I ran a lab that kind of looked into a little part of what antibiotic resistance can do. So I used the streak plate method for 2 different strains of E. coli, E. coli B and E. coli K12. So what I did was I used an inoculated loop and just streaked it on the plate and then sterilized it with a flame, turned the plate, used the streak, and then streaked it again. Sorry, that's really boring, but we grew colonies from that way. And then for my reading, I just searched Yale in the National Library of Medicine, searching terms like antibiotics, antibiotic resistance, and horizontal gene transfer. I did not understand half the papers I read, but I tried to get the words I did know. So these are the results I have. This is bacterial growth over 5 and 25 hours. So what I did was I used spectrophotometric analysis, which gets a reading on the light that's being absorbed. So the more light that's being absorbed, the more bacteria is present. And so these curves just show the growth of bacteria over 5 and 25 hours. The red is E. coli B and the blue is E. coli K12. So we can actually see that the E. coli B has a slightly different, or a slightly faster growth rate. And this is just significant because the difference in the growth rate shows us that even these closely related bacterial strains can behave differently under the same conditions. And this can matter for antibiotic resistance because when these antibiotics are misused, they don't just kill the bacteria, they actually create selective pressure that favors strains with traits to help them survive. So even these small physiological differences, like the growth rate, can show how diverse bacterial populations are and how easily resistance can circulate when it's given an advantage. So my key findings were that misuse leads to resistance. So misuse facilitates mutations, which again are changes in the sequencing of DNA. And so I like to think about it kind of like Kelly Clarkson, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. That is the only way I could think to phrase it. Where if you expose bacteria to dosages of antibiotics that are too low to kill them, only the susceptible bacteria are killed off, and all that you're left with is the bacteria that's resistant. Now, it would be possible for one bacterium to have that resistance and to be able to replicate itself until it grows into an actual colony. But what's a lot faster is if before it's the only one left, if it spreads that if through horizontal gene transfer, it spreads that resistance, and then those are able to repopulate. So HET happens a lot faster than replication, and so it's a lot faster to get resistance that way, and then it accelerates resistance. So that leads to the rise of superbugs. Now, superbugs are bacteria, viruses, parasites, or fungi that cannot be stopped by the first choice or the standard medicines. A common example of this we'll see is staph versus MRSA. Staph is typically treated by a penicillin like methicillin, whereas MRSA cannot be treated by that. It stands for methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. It cannot be treated by penicillins like methicillin. It has to be treated by something called vancomycin. That's a typical first-line treatment. But more infections stop responding to these first-line antibiotics. We've seen that actually a rise in this with MRSA, where before the 80s, it was typically contained to healthcare settings, and you would almost never see it acquired anywhere else. And around the 80s, we started seeing a rise in community-acquired MRSA, which is where it's developed anywhere outside of healthcare settings. So with that, we can just kind of see that it's been on the rise for a while. This graph shows the use of antibiotics per 1,000 inhabitants by countries' income groups. So it shows high income, low to middle income, and upper middle income. So we can actually see that they're pretty stable, but they face an increase, and we see a dip around 2020, which makes sense because we were quarantined, and so there wasn't as much of a chance for those bacterial infections to be spread. But we actually do still see a steady increase after that, leading up to 2023. And this is concerning because aside from the high income countries, you can see that the next highest is low to middle income countries. So after that, the higher income you become, the more antibiotics you're using. And we can account for this high income being the highest by the fact that there's just more accessibility to healthcare. More people are going to be prescribed antibiotics, and also we have more access to the data. Okay, so then we have the clinical consequences of this, where it's longer and more expensive treatments are required. Like I said, staph is typically treated by methicillin, and that runs at around $8, but MRSA, which is the resistant infection, is treated by vancomycin, which runs at around $80 for the same unit, so it's a lot more expensive. Staph is also typically requires a treatment time around 5 to 10 days, and MRSA requires one around 7 to 14 days, so there's an increase in the treatment time required. There are also higher complication rates and mortality. MRSA, for example, again, that can get into your lungs and it can induce pneumonia, and it can also infect your bones and something called osteomyelitis. Osteomyelitis carries a treatment time of a minimum of 8 weeks, so that's a huge increase. And this also matters for the cost. So if you were hospitalized for 1 day for a staph infection, that would cost you around $3,000 in the US on average. However, if you were required to be in the hospital for 8 weeks for osteomyelitis, which is the minimum, it carries an additional 1 to 3 months for chronic pain, it would cost you $169,400, and that's a 5,500% increase in the cost. And so there's also a global health and there's an economic impact. So antimicrobial resistance, which also includes fungal, viral, and parasitical resistance, that's projected to eradicate around 3.8% of our global GDP by 2050. Now, if we're using 2023's numbers, that's around $4.1 trillion that would be gone from our global GDP. And global GDP is expected to rise by 2050, meaning it would cost us more than $4.1 trillion. And this would be a heavy and disproportionate blow on those little middle-income countries who already rely on the assistance of wealthier countries for things like this, and who also would not be able to funnel as much money into their healthcare and education systems because they would be forced to focus on more emergent issues. And then it also reduces our global readiness and ability to respond to healthcare crises. We see this with COVID-19. It goes from an isolated case in December of 2019 in China to Washington, United States in the matter of a month. So disease can span the globe in the matter of a month, and when we don't know what bacteria is susceptible to what antibiotics, it causes a huge problem, especially when these alternative medications aren't produced in the same quantities as the standard medications. So using antibiotics incorrectly can lead to antibiotic resistance, which can cause infections to be more life-threatening, cause more complications, cost you a lot more money, and endanger global health and economy. But there are possible solutions and ideas for future research. Antibiotic stewardship and regulatory oversight mostly just entail international efforts to regulate the use of antibiotics and make sure that you can't buy them over the counter at all times, and that you need a prescription to get them, and that everyone knows what to use them for. And then international data sharing is key too, just to make sure that people, so that we know what antibiotics are becoming obsolete, what infections are becoming resistant, what infections are becoming more common, and what antibiotics are becoming more effective. And so the last thing that's really important is public education, making sure people know what antibiotics are, how to use them, not to use them without a prescription, and just what to do, and that people understand that it's not a personal issue. If you get an antibiotic-resistant infection and you spread it to your friend, that infection will be resistant as well. So it's not just a personal issue, it's a global issue. And I just want to say thank you to Mr. Ford, Mrs. Davis, and the ISP committee for all their help over this past year. Wouldn't have been able to do, I don't think I would have known where to start without any of them. So it's been a huge help, and thank you to my family who has now listened to this presentation 5 times.
For this next presentation, in the same way I think when I said you get snagged in a class at some point with an interest, it's hard for me to pinpoint where Zach was actually first started his interest in his topic here, because this has been an ongoing interest of his for multiple years, and it's something I appreciate as a science teacher when you teach the basics of the scientific method, when you do an iteration of something and then you adjust it and do another iteration. And at this point, there's 3 years of iterations on how to grow plants the best. And in that meantime, he's taken other classes, he started debating, things like that, and all of a sudden I noticed, all right, now there's a social ramification to how he's doing his research. He's applied it in a way, and it's all growing and evolving as he learns more and more about how systems biology works and how you can apply that to earth science, but then how you can also use it to solve some of the social and justice issues that the earth faces. So enjoying Zachary Davis's presentation on Parenting the Parrotfish.
I'm Zachary Davis, and this is my ISP project, Parenting the Parrotfish, using novel improvements to the VLSS to fight food insecurity and grow plants in low nutrient soils. So here's just a little bit about me first. I run track. I participated in multiple science fairs since 7th grade, and I like to play video games. So, as a background on my research journey, it began when, so I became interested in it sophomore year, and I kind of went from there, going to Mr. Ford about my interests. But for this project specifically, it began after I won my first award from NASA. So that came with access to their database, where I found the basis for my project, which is the bioregenerative life support system. So why I became interested, and so when I was listening to a Cherokee storyteller during my lunch and learn during my junior year, I listened to the hardships that he had faced on the reservation fighting food insecurity. This made me very interested in the topic, and is why I chose to address it for my ISP. So I soon proposed my idea to Mr. Ford, and it was rejected. I proposed it again, and then it was rejected. And we went through this cycle multiple times as I iterated my ideas. This project was, that process was very important to me, just because going through middle school science fairs, I was not really exposed to that same level of kind of innovation that you will always see in science, no matter how good you think your idea is. And so I think that that was a very important step for me, just because I was able to understand that just because it doesn't work on your first try, does not mean that you are not able to continue with the project, and that your first idea will not always be correct. So later I began my experiment, and by the end of that year I presented it at a science fair. So at the science fair, this was a board that I presented. So, oh wait, that's not that. Okay, yeah. So, at the National Science Fair, this is the project that I presented. And this experience was really important to me because it got me into presenting at that level, as well as being able to really show the impact of my research and be able to have that impact on such a great stage. And so, okay, so moving on to my actual experiment. So my experiment is pretty complex, but I broke it down so that no matter your experience with the subject, you'll be able to understand it. So I began the slides with a vocab word so that you'll know kind of what the vocabulary that I'm using will mean, and you'll be able to reference it. So and then the project will be summarized in just a few minutes. All right, so what a bioregenerative life support system is is it's a system of plants and microbes that improve soil fertility in a closed environment. We often see this technology used by NASA on like other planets, and so yeah, it's typically a tool for exploring other planets, but the gap that we see in this is they haven't been designed for Earth soils. So the difference between growing plants on the moon or in Earth soils is that they're limited because you're not able to use oxygen on like other planets, and so that greatly differentiates like using them in these two environments. So my project was one of the first designed specifically for Earth soils, which comes with a different set of challenges. So for my design, it was cost effective when we compared it to NASA research. So a NASA BLSS will typically cost like $3,000, and mine was in a larger scale, the same scale as theirs, would be $100. And in the smaller scale that I performed it on my experiments, it was $30. So for my BLSS, I combined sphagnum moss and endomycorrhizal fungi. So what endomycorrhizal fungi is a type of fungi that converts nitrogen from the air into ammonium, which is a form of nitrogen that plants use for growth. Then what sphagnum moss is it's a moss that increases the water retention, porosity, and detoxifies the soil. What that means is like porosity is kind of the airspace in between soil, so it allows plants to intake more oxygen as well as detoxify some of the heavy metals that we often see in these like difficult soils on reservations or in rare conditions. So yeah, the common issues as I kind of went over that we see on reservations, which is what I was focusing on for this project, was they have low nutrients for plants to grow with, so they're containing very little nitrogen or other nutrients that are needed for growth. Then we often see a high heavy metal content. What higher heavy metal means is it prevents the roots from growing as far, so they're able to take up much less nutrients from the soil, meaning that the plant cannot grow as much. Then we see like poor water retention in the soil because of the mineral composition. That just means that a lot of the water, like if you put a whole bucket of water into the soil, you would not be seeing the soil retain that as much. So then these issues were addressed through the endomycorrhizal fungi, which, and then like the sphagnum moss addressed the high heavy metal content and poor water retention. So for my experiment, I have 4 different treatment groups. My first was using sphagnum moss alone. The second was mycorrhizal fungi alone. The third was a control group. The fourth was a acidifier treatment, and the fifth was a phosphorus treatment. And then the BLSS was like a second experiment. So each treatment was meant to address like a different aspect of the BLSS on its own, so that it could be determined for future research. So first, the sphagnum moss treatment was just testing the effect of sphagnum alone. The mycorrhizal fungi treatment was testing kind of the addition of nitrogen, which is the effect of sphagnum moss. So the control was a baseline that I could compare the other trials to. So one of the effects of sphagnum moss is that it decreases the pH of the soil, which by decreasing the pH, you're able to have the plants take up more nutrients. And so this was tested, and then the phosphorus treatment was testing the detox effect of the sphagnum moss. So what phosphorus does is it bonds to the cations of these heavy metals, and so it'll be able to neutralize them that way. So onto the data analysis of my project. pH was measured through a common soil tester. Plant growth was measured using the dry mass of the plants. The water retention was like a slightly interesting method because many labs, when they're testing water retention of soil, will use methods that weren't accessible to me. And so what I did is I put a coffee filter over a graduated cylinder and then like poured 100 milliliters of water into the coffee filter with soil in it, and then subtracted like the water that gathered at the bottom from the 100, so that I could determine how much remained in the soil. Then the heavy metal content was determined by creating a bioassay and measuring root growth. So what a bioassay is when you're comparing a known quality. So the variable was the effect of the aluminum content, and so because that has a known effect on root growth, I compared the root growth over each treatment so that it could be determined which one was causing the least effects of the heavy metal. Yeah. And then on the results of the experiment, my hypotheses were supported. So the mycorrhizal group increased the plant growth by 3 times. This was likely because of the addition of the nitrogen into the soil, which we were seeing very low levels of nitrogen without, and so the injection of these nutrients probably greatly caused this effect. Then the sphagnum moss treatment created the best soil conditions, which in my experiment was the pH, the water retention, and the greatest average root growth. So what this means is ideal pH is 7, which different pHs affect how many nutrients the plants are able to take up through the roots. And so pH closer to 7 allows them to absorb the greatest amount of nutrients. And then the greatest average root growth just meant that the heavy metals were having the least effect. Then the BLSS resulted in a 400% increase when compared to the control of plant growth. And so I was really surprised by this because I didn't anticipate such a great effect. And so when looking back, I was actually able to determine that we saw almost a double when compared to either the sphagnum moss or the mycorrhizal fungi alone. And so looking back at that, I was able to determine that the sphagnum moss was also uptaking the nitrogen provided by the endomycorrhizal fungi in a symbiotic relationship. So I was very interested in that. And then before concluding my presentation, I wanted to kind of bring up a issue that we often see in science is that perspectives that aren't Western perspectives are kind of deprioritized. And so, and that was especially important when my project was focused on native reservations. So the BLSS is kind of touted as a new technology that was developed in the 90s. But what is interesting is that we see this technology being employed millennia ago by Native Americans and the Three Sisters, which basically the Three Sisters are beans, squash, and corn. And so we see a system where the beans are able to grow up the corn, and the leaves of the squash protect the beans of the squash are able to protect the soil, and then the leaves, and then the beans are providing nitrogen to the plant system. And so like often we're seeing that even though this isn't reported in like a scientific journal and isn't in wasn't analyzed, that doesn't make it any less valuable. So yeah. And then the takeaways from my experiment were that like my system was very effective, and in the future I want to look at actual reservation soil because I tested it on 2 conditions which like simulated reservation soil, but I think that we could get closer and more accurate by actual reservation soil. So thank you.
Good evening. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Hastings Grant this evening. At Heritage Hall, we challenge our students to learn with honor, to lead with courage, and to serve with compassion. And throughout this year, Hastings has embodied each of these ideals. For her ISP, Hastings pursued a project grounded both in rigorous research and deep personal connection. She set out to understand the lived experiences of children diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, inspired by her own sister's journey with a juvenile T1D diagnosis. Hastings approached this work with empathy and curiosity, combining the academic study of chronic illness with heartfelt interviews and observations that brought the realities of daily management, resilience, and family impact into focus. Her work illustrates something important. Behind every diagnosis is a child learning to navigate a new world, and a family learning alongside them. Hastings' thoughtful research has given voice to those experiences in a way that is accessible, compassionate, and genuinely meaningful. While we will hear only a brief snapshot of her findings tonight, the insight she has gained and shared will continue to shape understanding and support for young people managing T1D. Hastings, I'm incredibly proud of what you have accomplished, not only as a researcher and a scholar, but as someone who leads with heart. Your desire to use your work to help others reflects the very best of who you are. One of my favorite college professors always encouraged her students to do good and to do well. Hastings, I have no doubt that you will do very well in life because you are already doing so much good. Please join me in welcoming Hastings Grant.
So my ISP is about mental health in juvenile type 1 diabetics. In 2021, my sister Olive was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. At this time, she was in kindergarten and I was in 7th grade. I did not really know what was going to happen to my family or what diabetes was, but 3 months prior to her diagnosis, we could see as like a family, she really wasn't acting right or like what was happening with her, but in the car 3 months later, she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and my dad told me that she was in the hospital. I really didn't know what was going to happen to my family or what was going to happen to Olive, but somewhere between the many finger pricks I began to give her, I realized that diabetes is more than just treating blood sugar, that it's a constant burden on what a person might experience and constant thinking about what's next. So you might be wondering, what is type 1 diabetes? Type 1 diabetes is an uncurable autoimmune disease where the immune system attacks the pancreas, destroying cells that produce the insulin. Since the body attacks the pancreas, the body no longer produces insulin, which keeps the blood sugar level. So for us as non-diabetics, our blood sugar is normally a straight line with a little bit of curves, but for a diabetic, there might be some peaks in it. So whenever a diabetic goes low, they might feel shaky, lightheaded, and have a headache, and they normally treat with a juice. And whenever a diabetic goes high, they treat with insulin, and they might feel angry and sad.
So how do you treat diabetes? Treating diabetes requires lifestyle changes, insulin administration, formulas, and blood sugar testing. So lifestyle changes might include eating a healthy diet, managing your stress, and physical activity. And people with diabetes make 180 more health-related decisions a day compared to a non-diabetic, which is about every 5 minutes they are awake. In order to give insulin, you have to count carbs for your meals and everything that you eat. So you give insulin through insulin shots or an insulin pump. Testing your blood sugar comes with finger pricks 4 to 10 times a day, or a continuous blood glucose monitor that gives you a read every 5 minutes, depending on the device. So compared to children without the condition, children with the condition were over twice as likely to develop a mood disorder and more than 50% more likely to develop an anxiety disorder. So based on my sister's experience, I created a 50-question survey including multiple choice, scale, and open-ended responses to understand the type 1 diagnosis and how that might affect the child. I examined how diabetes management from pre-diagnosis to diagnosis affects the mental, physical, and emotional well-being of a child. The results provided me with a deeper understanding of what diabetic might be feeling. So the sampling method I utilized was a research convenient sample, and I emailed and texted parents of children that I know through all of diagnosis. And the survey was intended for children under the age of 18 with their parents' consent, and no identifying information other than age was received. I received 14 responses, and even though this survey response was small, I gained a deeper understanding into their lived lives, and most of the respondents had a similar outlook on their diabetes. Most of the respondents, about 50 of them, were between the ages of 10 and 13. I asked questions like, have you ever experienced burnout because of your diabetes? How comfortable do you feel giving yourself insulin? How supportive are your family and friends in your diabetes? What does type 1 diabetes burnout feel like for you? And what frustrates you about having type 1 diabetes? This is a qualitative study, and I analyzed responses to identify overarching themes which will be presented here. From my responses, I found that diabetics experience burnout and feel frustrated towards diabetes. Being at a young age, they might feel alone, left out, and not know how to treat themselves or what their diabetes entails. So when they're burnout and tired, they don't want to treat their diabetes, and it's hard for them to have that motivation to continue on. So a respondent said, it feels like I want to act like I don't have diabetes. The constant thinking about how to give insulin and takes a toll on the diabetic, especially when their numbers are not in the range that they were hoping for that day. Feeling left out was also a common theme in a diabetic, and most of the time, about 40% was in a social setting and 30% was in a school setting, so that was mostly around their peers. One respondent said, sometimes I don't get invited to friends' houses because the parents don't feel comfortable with diabetes. The care of a diabetic takes a toll on a child. What they put into the disease and every decision made with it might not have the outcome that they wanted, and that requires 24-hour care. A quote that really stood out to me was, it is frustrating for the most part that this is a silent disease, and people do not realize all the work that you have to put into it. They can only tell you when you are super low or sick from a high. You have to ask yourself so many questions throughout the day to determine how to manage this disease. At the same time, it can be really upsetting when people see you as a person with diabetes instead of all your personality and talents. When people make jokes about it, they do not realize how much they can actually hurt our feelings. So from the survey, it helped me understand the correlation between mental health and type 1 diabetes, and the results of this analysis are important in helping to understand the greater degree of a lived experience in the child. This information could inform families, teachers, caregivers, and others about how to support children in their community who have been affected by type 1 diabetes. People with diabetes experience burnout, emotional exhaustion, frustration, uncertainty, and a lot of anger. And a child's blood sugar won't always be perfect. Staying positive lessens the burden associated with the disease so you can go into the next day stronger than you were in the first day. Even with all the challenges, everything will slowly become better. A respondent said, "It will become the new normal. Just give it time and don't stress too much. Staying in that range is hard. Just do the best you can." Not every day will go as planned in a diabetic's world, but continuing on the journey of diabetes and every factor that comes with it will make those harder days a lot easier. But I believe by bringing awareness to this disease, especially in young children, will bring us to type 1 diabetes and to type 9. I'd like to thank all my teachers that helped me, especially my advisor, Dr. Lyons, who helped me throughout my ISP and provided me motivation. I also would like to thank my family and Olive, who gave me passion for this project. Thank you.
Well, welcome. We have a 5-minute or so intermission, and then we'll see your students ready to present. If you get more food, they're going to take it pretty soon. More is plenty. And then we'll continue on.
It'll be quick. I might have to leave in a bit. My mom's like asking me to come home because she wants me to come pick up some stuff from the house. What time? Right now. Just can you, real quick before you go, can you put that camera like on the podium? Yeah. Thank you. And drop it there.
Drank a beer with him on the day of graduation. Went to our wedding. Fantastic guy. Well, it was just totally. Oh, it was fantastic. Yeah. I don't think I can get in there now. I should probably do it.
Thank you. It was good seeing you.
Good job, guys.
Oh, good.
Not a way that you ever want to describe your lunch. That your lunch are fiber.
I didn't have a resolution, but I didn't
No. No, that's not.
I don't think I can do. Never took how to teach class. So Mr. Taylor, we are outside, right?
I'm pretty sure it's me, but.
Okay. Well, Thursday? Alright. That's right,
Yeah.
Friday? Is it free yet? You know?
Send the invite out.
We have.
Muted mic, right?
I can turn it off.
just about ready to begin the second half of the evening. It is my joy to introduce Grayson McCone this evening. Grayson joined the Charger family as a sophomore, and since joining us, she has been a steady, kind, and deeply compassionate member of our community. I was thrilled when she expressed interest in participating in ISP this year, eager to challenge herself. Knowing Grayson's passion for athletics and law, I anticipated she would pursue a thoughtful and relevant topic, including both of these. And she did exactly that. She has dedicated countless hours to researching the evolution of the NIL and examining its impact on players, coaches, organizations, and even youth sports. Her curiosity and commitment to understanding this complex issue have been evident throughout her work. Grayson, I am incredibly proud of the hard work and dedication you have poured into making your ISP what it is today. You have faced challenges along the way, yet you have continued to persevere with grace, determination, and a genuine desire to grow. I hope you know how much you have impacted all of us. Your strong character, resilience, and willingness to step out of your comfort zone, even tonight, are qualities that will serve you well, well beyond the walls of the hall. Please join me in welcoming Grayson McCone.
Hello. Welcome back and good evening. My year-long study has been over NIL and its effects on college athletes and athletics. So, I'm going to start with a little crowd engagement.
A show of hands, who here knows what NIL is? Okay, a lot of people. Okay, so it's a little easier. So I had a few methods for this project. My first primary method was to send out a questionnaire to the athletic directors of various colleges, ranging from colleges with small NIL recognition and funds to ones with larger fund recognition. Now, my goal was to compare and contrast these responses from the questionnaire to determine the effects that NIL has on larger universities with more NIL funds versus smaller universities with smaller NIL funds. However, this project failed miserably due to a lack of responses, except for notable USC, who emailed me saying they did not partake in my study. It's fine. Thank you for the response anyway. So, my goal for the study was to determine the effects that NIL has on college and athletics, and to determine ultimately whether those effects were primarily positive or negative. Now, prior to my research, I did not have a preconceived answer to whether NIL was positive or negative, and I allowed my findings to guide me and direct me to my overall answer, which was, for the most part, primarily negative effects. So instead, I pivoted to a combination of school student research studies and surveys, which surveyed their own athletes about their personal experience and their personal motivation to pursue NIL deals at that said college. I also combined articles and published works to come to that conclusion. Now, this diagram is one of the only ones in my project, cited mine from one of my sources, because I had to put a picture there somewhere. And it's an example by a USC student and named Isaiah Simmons, who studied the effects of NIL on USC students and its history throughout its evolution of what it is now. So, what is NIL? Here is an example of everyone's favorite quarterback, Arch Manning. Not really, though. So what is NIL? In 2021, a law was passed that allowed athletes to profit from their NIL, their name, image, and likeness, which previously the NCAA and universities received all their revenue and profit from their NIL. The assets felt as though they were being undermined by the NCAA because they received none of this profit.
So the NIL clause originally sought to benefit athletes and to allow them to earn profit from their NIL. However, the NCAA fought against the application for decades for two primary reasons. They sought to maintain their control over the business aspect of college athletics and to preserve amateurism and tradition in college athletics. NIL is simply flawed due to a lack of limitations regulations. So what are some examples of how NIL can be earned for college athletes? So we have social media promotions, which accounts for 80% of NIL deals that have resulted from social media. Endorsements, where an athlete will work with a brand to receive compensation, public appearances, and merchandise. However, as of 2024, athletes will have to receive direct payment from the universities, pushing the predetermined boundaries of NIL. However, so back to my example of Arch Manning. Why he's up there is because he currently has the highest NIL valuation in college football at $6.8 million. His brand deals include Red Bull, Warby Parker, Biore, and Uber. However, when he was a freshman, he was making $3.2 million as the backup quarterback. This was due to his name recognition and fame by social media. So what are the effects of NIL? There are many effects that NIL has on other athletic aspects. So NIL has negatively impacted many factors related to college athletics. It will cause smaller and less profitable athletic programs to be cut and for jobs to be lost. It will force athletes to lose their athletic scholarships. Some examples include OU's 5% cut on full-time athletic staff, OU's cut on athletic programs and roster funding, and Sale University, kind of a random one, their cut on male and female indoor track and male tennis programs to, as they said, better compete with the new playing field in regard to NIL. So what are the effects on schools with a smaller NIL fund and recognition? They will no longer be able to compete on the same playing field as the more funded programs. It will promote a continuous pay-for-play attitude, and the schools with the highest funds in NIL will be the most competitive. Now, another major impact is on women's athletics. NIL promotes severe gender inequality. Women's athletics in progress made under Title IX are threatened by unequal NIL opportunities. The efforts to promote women's athletics are harmed due to these opportunities, which were addressed originally in 2021 with the application of NIL. However, the promise to provide equal payments and NIL deals has not been upheld. Therefore, it might cause their programs to be reduced or cut. So there's also a major threat to academics. So athletes are spending valuable time allotted for academics, overworking on athletics. The time caps need to be upheld to promote academic success. The NCAA put a cap at 20 hours per week. However, most athletes, according to a paper by UNH, spend 30 to 50 hours on practice, travel, and games. This leaves minimal time for academics. And a large majority of athletes are not going to go pro. So academics are vital to preserving a sustainable future. There's also added pressure on high school athletes to build a personal brand, name, and image to acquire specialized private training. This is added pressure to prove themselves, and it promotes injury and burnout from overworking. Also, there's also an insane pressure to practice and build media image, and a lack of financial experience will cause risk of fraud. However, this has been mostly combated with financial advisors provided by the school. Also, it harms team relations. It promotes jealousy, and the time spent with advertisements and deals will harm team dynamics. So what are the blurred lines of college athletics, or of NIL and amateur and professional sports? So the NCAA has combated the application of NIL for a long time to preserve amateur values, keyword amateur, in college athletics. The financial compensation further blurs the line of professional and amateur athletics and threatens the traditional amateurism, which in the Sanity Code of 1948 was a primary pillar of the NCAA. Sanity Code sought to combat media coverage and televised athletic or college sports post-World War II. Also, NIL promotes unstable recruiting processes, which combined with the transfer portal are fairly relevant right now. So where is the line drawn? It will continuously move on to a section where you cannot even distinguish it anymore. In conclusion, there should be further research done to find a safe and effective way to regulate and perhaps eventually abolish NIL. Though it has both positive and negative effects on college athletics, the majority tend to be negative. Mental health, financial pressure, education, and the effects on small and less profitable programs are all major effects of NIL. It is also a major threat to amateurism, and it will no longer be different from professional sports. Initially intended as a way to benefit the athletes, it has since morphed into financial arms race, where they're widening the gap between the haves and have-nots in college athletics. My acknowledgements are to Ms. Porter. Thank you for helping me throughout my crisis this morning, without giving this speech. I appreciate that. And to Mr. Castle, who is not here today, but thank you again for all this guidance you provided me with. Ms. Davis for also helping me out with all this guidance and working through my failed projects, and to my dad for being a guiding pillar throughout this, and to my mom for causing me stress. Love you anyway. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Humanity is garbage. Modern humanity, more accurately put, we, individuals in the United States and Oklahoma walking around, are walking, talking producers of trash. We produce trash, we produce garbage. All the time. We're doing it tonight. I did it a few minutes ago. Unfortunately, this is a problem. All that garbage doesn't go away. It's got to go somewhere. And if you live in Oklahoma, it's not leaving the state. It's got to go somewhere here. That is the question and the problem that Jonathan Carter sought out to investigate and look into in his ISP project. His project, titled The Effects of Single-Use Plastics on Waste Disposal Capacity in Oklahoma and Practical Solutions, focuses on the problem of single-use plastics in the state, what's being done with those things, and what are some practical things that could be done to make humans a little less trashy. Like maybe we can do stuff to make it not as bad. And so that's the goal of really this ISP. And Jonathan has truly defines the ISP, the independent study part of the ISP presentation. He needed very little guidance from me. Did this project solely on his own. He's got some interesting stuff. Our interactions with trash is very kind of like, we use it, we throw it away, we might try to recycle some, which is good, right? We should probably do that more. But Jonathan is one of us that has seen where this trash goes. He has toured where this trash goes. He has seen it, he has smelt it, right? He has been around it, and he knows a lot more about it than I do. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jonathan. He's here to educate us about these single-use plastics in Oklahoma and what we can do to maybe make the problem a little bit better. Jonathan.
Perfect. Thank y'all so much for being here. So I'm going to start y'all off with just visualizing how much plastic we're actually using in Oklahoma. So imagine filling the entire OU football stadium 6 times with plastic waste. That's roughly actually how much single-use plastic we're actually using in Oklahoma. And you might be thinking why I've cared so much about this topic. My dad has always set an example in my household to take care of the environment, like not using single-use plastic when you don't have to, and also recycling the proper way. I've been pretty knowledgeable about it, and I've learned pretty recently as well how to recycle properly. So, and I also think it's important for everyone to implement this in their life because, as Mr. Gaston said, these items can cause environmental pollution and harm to the society that we live in. And obviously, I want to figure out how to slow down the rate at which these are filling up the waste disposal sites. So I have three kind of sections that I am going to present to you. My first one is talking about the landfill problems, basically educating on single-use plastic, and also the modern landfills, because I did go and see one of the landfills in Oklahoma. And then next is the results of my survey, what the people thought about it basically, and the possible solutions to my survey. So first we're going to talk about Oklahoma landfills. Basically, obviously, hills of trash in your cities. When you're driving around them, they're very visible near the road. They have very limited space. You would think that you can just basically stack a bunch of trash onto a hill, but they have a certain maximum capacity that they can reach, and once that hits, you need to find a new space to find a landfill. And this can be very expensive, very time-consuming, very inconvenient. So, you want to try to preserve the landfills that you have so they can last longer. And obviously, plastics, reduce landfill lifespans because, they don't degrade as much because obviously it's not like paper. You use it once, you use single-use plastics once, and then it gets dumped into a landfill for years or maybe even centuries. So single-use plastics, when I mean single-use plastics, I mean, bags, bottles, food packaging, cups and straws, things that, when you go to a grocery store, basically, you go and get just like a meal, basically, it's covered in plastic. Everything that you're getting is usually covered in plastic, and then you're going and putting that in a bag that you carry to your car. So, you could obviously see why this is pretty harmful. You use it once and then it's no use. And also, a lot of people don't know that once you actually put in the recycle, it's actually 10% of it's actually being recycled, because a lot of people aren't actually knowledgeable about what, like how to recycle properly. For instance, just like a plastic bottle, if you crunch it up, they actually won't recycle it because crunching it up, basically it's wrinkled, and it's kind of difficult for places to make that useful for them. Also, if you don't have like the wrapper around it, or if you don't take the wrapper around it, they also will probably just throw that away. So next I will educate y'all on what a modern landfill basically is. So first you have a liner, which is basically underneath all of the trash waste, which basically they describe it to me as like a bathtub that you're just filling stuff with, I guess, the trash in. Next you have a leachate pipe, basically a pipe that goes underneath, and it collects all the leachate, which leachate is liquid from all the waste, so it's very toxic. And then you have trash cells. You can see where it says right there, working phase. This is basically where they're actively putting trash, compacting it. And then for this example, it says a plastic cover. This is basically when they're done with that, it's reached a certain maximum height, they will cover it, and that's the end of it. And for the one I went to, they didn't use a plastic cover. They used vegetation and actual grass. So yeah, and then gas wells. You can see there's like 4 of them on the top. This is how these companies actually make a lot of their money. So basically what happens is it goes into the trash. It gets the gas from the trash, which is usually a source of methane, and they will either, depending on a few things, they will either burn it or they will create it into natural gas, and then they will send it to a natural gas facility. And I think the guy that I talked to, the manager, said that they make around like $10 million a month off this, like their whole company. So, yeah. So my landfill business, I'll show you, I'll talk to you about how the whole situation works. So first they go to a scale house where the truck is basically, comes in, basically showing how much they're actually going to put onto the landfill, and the active working phase is where it gets dumped onto the actual, active cell, and then they spread it, compact it, and then gas Walker talked about that. I'll talk about it a little bit later. But this is basically, again, how they transfer it to natural gas. Stormwater management, they have kind of just ponds on the bottom to separate the clean stormwater from the leachate, which kind of runs down the mountain. And then the leachate collection system, which collects the leachate at the bottom. And then you also have a blower station. This basically it creates a negative pressure to be able to get the gas from all the waste, and then a closed cell is basically a cell that has already been done. So here are a few pictures. So these are some pictures of an active working phase. Basically, you can see how they're spreading it all, compacting it, and once they're done for the day, they will put about 5 inches of soil or dirt or whatever so it doesn't blow away. And then the next day they'll take it back off and then put more as needed. And then once they are finished with that, they will put 5 feet of soil on it and then put grass around it to make it look as natural as possible. And that's when the closed cell is. And then these are cages. One of the main problems they have on these waste disposal sites are blown trash, like trash bags. That's they also have another problem are birds. Birds like to take away a lot of the the plastic and different waste objects. And they actually have a system at the bottom. It's kind of it sounds like a gunshot that goes off every 8 seconds, and it keeps the birds away just enough. So I thought that was pretty cool. Next, this is the top of the landfill. You can see the Devon Tower in the back. And the picture on the right, there's a hay bale, and I thought it was pretty interesting. You wouldn't expect a hay bale to be on a waste disposal site, but there was, and it kind of just shows how they're trying to keep everything pretty natural. They also said that they have a bunch of animals that come on the top at night, so it's pretty cool. So on the left, it's a gas well basically. On the left side, you can see how it's going into the ground, and then they set the gas back up and send it away. And then the right, this is a leachate system where it basically collects it, and then you can see that yellow kind of pipe. It's like a double pump, because just to make sure that nothing else leaks from the system, because leachate getting out into the environment is not necessarily good. It's pretty toxic. This is me in front of the sign. The reason why it's got a picture of this is because in the background you can see, this is an example of a closed cell. You can see the mound, and it has all of the grass onto it, so it kind of shows what this closed cell looks like. So a little bit of landfill stats. I will run through this pretty quick, but the initial permit of this Southwest OKC landfill, it started in 1965, and as of 2014, the capacity, it was at 48% capacity, and so this means that the remaining lifespan is around 30 to 40 years. So this is my public opinion survey that I got, that I had 100 Oklahoma adults answer some questions on whole fish, which basically tested their knowledge on plastic and what they thought about my solutions to this, to my ideas, which ones they thought were best, because I want an idea, obviously, that is realistic for the people in Oklahoma, because I want a realistic solution to this. So these are some stats I got. I'll talk about that in a little bit, actually. So are SUPs a problem? So 74% said that SUPs are a major contributor to landfill waste, but most did not know that only 10% of plastics are actually recyclable. So what solutions sounded good to the people? So my first one that I came up with was store discounts for reusable containers. And so you can see in these two photos right here, this is a place I saw in Vermont, that it's either a big tub of honey or peanut butter, that you could bring reusable containers and then fill it up as much as you want and then pay for it at the front. And I thought this was a good way because, this store didn't actually have plastic that was given to you. You had to bring your own reusable plastic. So I thought that was a pretty good idea. And 86% said that they supported this and 9% opposed this. Next one was manufacturer responsibility, which is basically like the manufacturers of the actual plastic have to spend a little bit of money into actually, helping the environment, spending money in helping recycle and clean up some of this waste. And 66% supported this, 14 opposed. And then my last one was refundable deposits. This is basically like the plastic that you buy at the store is like taxed just like a tiny bit, and then if you bring it back, you basically get that money back. 46% supported, 8% opposed, and then the rest were just kind of neutral. So why this all matters? So obviously, like I said, landfills have a limit, and I want to basically, I want to slow down the rate at which these landfills are, reaching their maximum capacity, because it does take up a lot. So if we can at least, if you get anything out of this, I want y'all to be knowledgeable about plastics maybe. Think about at least how much plastic that you're using so you can maybe use less. And, I hope that my solutions can, actually be realistic and help the environment. Thank you. Oh, and then also acknowledgements. I have these at the end. So Brian Gaston, and then Miss Porter, Katie Davis, and then the manager that helped me, gain knowledge about modern landfills, and then the actual service that let me come. So thank you so much.
All right, good evening. I'm Luke Steelman. I'm our Director of Sports Media here at Heritage Hall. As my next person that's coming up that I'm presenting knows, in our sports media program we use cheat sheets. I have mine digital tonight on my phone, so bear with me. I'm not the best public speaker. But I want to start it by giving a quick shout out to our Charger Vision crew. We actually have 2 alumni here tonight, along with a student who did the first portion. We are streaming this. Where it'll be immediately archived after, so if you have friends or family that didn't get to see your child present, or you just want to share this with them afterwards, you can catch it on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/ChargerVision. And you can also see clips from the 3 games that Taylor Williams broadcasts on Charger Vision this year if you look back at the archives. So I first came to know Taylor Williams when she took my fall 2023 sports media class. She did a handful of live broadcasts that year on our crew, but the thing that as I reflected on that I was really impressed with about her was how creative she was, how self-motivated she was, and how quality-oriented she was. She did her choice projects, 10 or so, I think all 10 of them, she did social media graphics, and they were above and beyond what any other of the students in the class were doing. And it was apparent her love of sports, and especially football, because a lot of those graphics were related to our football games. So when she approached me about the ISP project, I was immediately excited that she was going to be pursuing that because I knew how successful she was going to be at it. I have seen firsthand over the 10 or so years with Charger Vision the perceived, we'll call them barriers for women to be involved in sports media. Just based on the lower amount of involvement from female students, which I'm always seeking to try to create more balance there through the program. And that's basically the crux of what Taylor's project is women in sports media. And so I don't want to steal too much of her thunder and talk more about that, but I do want to express, Taylor, how proud I am of you for your work on this project and for the courage and the barriers that you're already breaking through. I'm even more excited to follow what you do after this as you pursue a career in sports media and tackle even more challenges in the future. So without further ado, I present to you Charger Vision's first ever female football commentator, Taylor Williams.
My name is Taylor Williams, and I have been researching women in the sports industry and the power of sports commentary. When I was little, I watched my older brother play high school football at Heritage Hall and continued to attend sporting events with my dad. And these cherished moments became more than just a tradition. As I grew older, I realized that sports is more than just a game. It's a game that brings people together and creates an environment filled with passion, happiness, love, and a community bigger than itself. The two questions I was researching over the past year were, what does it take to effectively translate on-the-field sports to commentary that is persuasive, easily understandable, and engaging for a live audience? And secondly, do audience today respond more positively to female or male sports commentators? To start off my ISP, I decided to do background research on females in the industry and the inequalities and barriers they face. Females in the sports industry have faced inequalities since the late 19th to early 20th century, and this data supports the discrepancies. Something I would like to point out is that in the past 10 years, only 16% of females are sports broadcasters. Females appear as the less intelligent and vulnerable sex when compared to males, and they face challenges such as long-standing gender stereotypes, audience biases of validating credibility, and limited career advancements. Many sources have revealed that female commentators are only favored in female sports, while male commentators are favored in all sports regardless of expertise. Organizations continue to try to find ways to increase the number of females in the industry. However, male commentators continue to persist in dominating the industry. To continue the discussion about inequalities females face, a female's outer appearance often overshadows their skills, knowledge, and contributions. This quote encompasses the concept of appearance in the industry. I work with male colleagues who aren't the best looking people in the world, maybe a little overweight, but no one seems to care if a man is perhaps bald or a little punchy. If a woman is a little too heavy or not pretty, she probably won't have a job. This quote shows the double standard that females face when compared to men, as men often do not have to face job loss and criticism based off of their appearance. However, females are held to a stricter standard, and their knowledge and personality are judged after their appearance, which is unfair and unjustified. Furthering my research, I did an interview with Elizabeth Estrada, a broadcast journalist and U.S. reporter, and a U.S. Today reporter. She has been working in the industry for 11 years, and she believes that females are evolving in their role and that they're getting offered new opportunities. However, the number of females are not equivalent to the amount of men covering sports. She herself has not dealt with any discrimination. However, she has had many colleagues who have struggled with gender barriers. The interview with Ms. Estrada helps me better understand how gender, experience, and work ethic can help influence someone's experience, can help influence someone's journey into the industry. After researching inequalities that women face, I did background research over what makes commentary effective. First of all, preparation is key. It is the heart to commentary. You must prepare a week in advance, watch past sporting events to build a style and learn from commentators, and review and know stats about the game, team, and players. Other major factors that contribute to preparation are practice talking from your diaphragm and practice pacing and pitch, which can transform critical moments in a game, and if the pitch and pacing is off, then the commentary can feel less engaging for the audience to listen to. Lastly, a useful method for preparation is making a commentary cheat sheet, which can involve key phrases, vocabulary words, talking points, and interesting facts. Secondly, commentators should paint a picture with their words by adding emotion, depth, and opinion-based ideas for their audience so that their audience can envision the game in their minds. To enhance my research, I did a live commentary experience during 3 Heritage Hall football games alongside Justin Evans and became the Heritage Hall's first female sports commentator. I quickly realized how challenging it was and how much pressure I was under, as the game's tempo is fast-paced and I had to rely on preparation and Justin Evans' guidance to keep up. Therefore, I practiced making on-the-spot decisions, having confidence in myself, and preparing a week in advance, and building a style into my commentary. After my commentary experience, I decided to bring my research about females in the industry and how to make commentary effective into a research trial. My purpose was to explore how gender affects the way people watch sports commentary and whether skill-based traits can counteract these biases. I used a video clip from Football Night in America with 3 sports commentators, 1 female and 2 males. The female spoke a little bit more so she balanced out the commentary. I used 38 students from 2 speech and civics classes who rated the commentators on 4 skills: friendliness, personality, expertise, and clarity. The results indicated that skill-based traits can help counteract gender biases, as the female commentator consistently received stronger ratings than the male commentators. My findings showed that the female commentator was able to match or even outperform her male commentators. Something that happened a lot throughout the research was limitations, as the participants could have favored certain teams or the commentator speaking. The results were not generalized to a broader audience, and the age range was limited. And lastly, it was difficult to find an audio clip with both a female and male commentator. These are the results, and it shows that there is hope for the future in females trying to enter the sports industry. And as you can see, the audience perceptions are shifting in the younger generations. In conclusion, commentary is an art built on preparation, knowledge, personality, and confidence. And lastly, females have to rise to a different level, outperform their male counterparts, and challenge gender norms to fight for higher positions in the industry. I hope to not just enter the industry, but to help change it. Thank you, Mr. Steelman, for your continuous support along the year as my advisor. Thank you, Justin Evans, for your guidance, steering, commentating, and a special thank you to Dr. and Mr. Lyons, Katie Davis, and my mom.
It's my honor to introduce David Griffin and his ISP, Native Americans, A Story of Pride and Purpose. David is a curious, intelligent, and exceptionally hardworking individual whose dedication to ethical scholarship is evident throughout his work. His creativity and approach to his project took courage and allowed him to step out of his comfort zone and approach representing a rigorous, student-driven inquiry into the rich culture, historical, and contemporary realities of Oklahoma's Native American population. Parker Castle also adds, David's work ethic, integrity, and an intellectual curiosity distinguish him as one of Heritage Hall's most dedicated young leaders. Academically gifted and relentlessly hardworking, he brings clarity and insight to his project, a rare expertise, something so dynamic and nuanced. His leadership extends beyond the classroom, where he serves as student body president and represents our community through meaningful service and civic involvement across Oklahoma City. Today, he brings that same passion and purpose to his independent study project on the modern Native stories of Oklahoma. Welcome, David Griffin.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for all being here. Thank you, Mr. Lyons, for the great introduction. And tonight, I'm here to present my independent studies project over the lessons we can learn from the Native population of Oklahoma. So a little bit of background on my project. I started this project where basically I traveled across Oklahoma, interviewing tribal leaders and proud Native Americans in the community, hoping to learn about these people's stories and what makes the tribe so special. As a result, I interviewed 7 total people, from artist Gwen Coleman Lester to Choctaw Councilman Anthony Dillard. And over the span of the project, I began to notice commonly held values by each person, which I'll highlight in this presentation. With each interview, I went and had a journalistic approach to each interview, asking similar questions in an hour-long interview each, and then ended off each one with a portrait, which hopefully I hope you guys will all see, that is really right now in the Embry Gallery. And a couple of the portraits will be on the slideshow as they go. My inspiration for this project centers around a coffee table book that I saw in an office space that I just picked up when I was bored, and I never really thought it could end up like this. So this project was by Brandon Stanton. He's a New Yorker, very creative, and he basically started a project where he roamed around New York, interviewing random people, taking their photos and then asking them intimate questions about maybe what they're struggling with in life, their values, what brings them happiness, what brings them joy. And as I continue to read, as I continue to look at all these compelling stories, compelling quotes next to these really intimate portraits, I was really compelled to do something very similar. But I knew I couldn't just copy Brandon Stanton's point of view, so I knew I had to turn to something bigger than myself, something that I could learn a little bit more about who I am and where my family comes from. So I turned to my Native American side, which is my dad's side of the family, but living in Oklahoma City, I felt very disconnected. I haven't really had any connection to the tribe. My only connection was really my grandmother, my grandmother, Honey, my late grandmother, who she was a key founder in the finding of the 5 Civilized Tribes Museum, which is an art museum in the greater Tulsa area. So I started my project with a bunch of research in April, starting with the history, basically starting around 1492 when the contact with Europeans was first made, up until the Trail of Tears, which started this kind of spiral and different path of Native Americans. Trail of Tears, basically, over a couple of years, 100,000 Native Americans were forced to take the more than 1,000-mile trail from the deep south to Oklahoma. And these were all in efforts to gain more land for whether farming, resources. And as Johnny mentioned earlier in the speech, they're put on lands in Oklahoma that aren't very fertile, not in really great shape. So, and as the time went on, the U.S. government tried to find other opportunities, other ways to combat this with boarding schools, which they sent Native Americans to try to encourage them to assimilate into modern United States culture and rid themselves of what makes their tribe so special, rid them of their values. My first interview was with this wonderful Oto, Missouri lady, Tanya Woody. She is a worker at an art store in the stockyards, and she talked about how these efforts, at least with her ancestors who were in the boarding schools, these efforts all circled around trying to abandon or trying to strip the culture from the Native Americans. But in an effort, as contrary to what the people who headed these projects believed, these efforts only brought the people closer together. These hard trials they had to go through, these hard tribulations, only brought these people closer to what they wanted to achieve. Another one of my interviews was with a Choctaw artist, Miss Gwen Coleman Lester. She talks about how when you're denied something, it becomes that much more important. Those bonds grow stronger because they've been through something so hard. These boarding schools, all the trials they faced from the U.S. government, and all the lack of opportunity they gained made them come together for a greater purpose, something greater than themselves, and founded the values that they share today that I really noticed in my interviews of community, impact on purpose, and pride. So I think one of the most influential priorities, and something that I can 100% guarantee, is that the Native American population would not be nearly where they are without, especially in Oklahoma, without the help of economics, which came from casinos. And around the 1950s, there's a ton of movements that Native Americans came together, tried to get political voice, but they had no economic input, no economic power. And as one of my subjects said, it takes a checkbook to get into a room, it takes a checkbook to get a voice, so they needed to find something. So they scanned a lot of their rights, they found out what they could do, and they found that they have the rights to hold gaming enterprises. So they started with bingo halls in the 1970s. It eventually scaled to casinos, and those casinos scaled to the big ones you see like Riverwind, Windstar, Kickapoo, and all the hundreds across Oklahoma and even the greater United States area. Today in Oklahoma, these casinos are bringing in about $6.8 billion of revenue per year. But every single tribal dollar that is made, at least that is not given to through grants back to the state government, is reinvest in the community. There's no investors pocketing it. Everything's going back into culture, education, housing in the future, trying to regrow this community, regrow this culture that was stripped away in the 1900s. This results in better healthcare, higher quality K-12 education, increased access to higher education, affordable housing, and cultural engagement programs. In parts of Oklahoma, these really rural towns that don't have really much opportunity within them. One of my interview subjects has multiple children that were able to attend higher education universities due to scholarships and programs that all the money came from these casinos. The man on the left, as you see, is Mr. Gary Pitchland. He's a prominent lawyer who helps represent the tribes within a lot of these land disputes. And when I talked to him, he brought a good eye about casinos, and they're not just about money, they're about self-determination for these people. Without the casinos, as I said earlier, it's likely they would not regain their sovereignty, they would have not had any political voice, they would not have the power they do, especially in this state today. So I got a good background on a lot of the history, of the stories of the people as a whole, but I wanted to look more into the values they hold. The most prominent value I saw from each and every person was they had a purpose in their work. They had pride. They were working for something that was much bigger than themselves. One person I feel like he highlighted she's a Taylor Martin. She's a local business owner. She owns Cheyenne Sky Studio, which is a metalsmithing studio right in Midtown. And she took her passion, which is art, creativity, in metalsmithing, and connected it to something bigger than herself. And with each piece she creates, she tries to bring in elements from her family history, her tribal history, and even just the greater community of Oklahoma as a whole. And on top of that, she holds these classes where she hopes people can come in and really gain a legacy with each thing they made. Her biggest thing, and she said this probably 20 times in the interview I had, was legacy. For her, it's all about legacy. And although she isn't making these these pieces that are selling for thousands or hundreds on these websites going across the globe, she feels a greater sense of purpose, a greater sense of pride in what she does, just based on the fact that she knows there's a legacy in every piece. It's not just because it looks cool, she knows there's something deeper in it, and that's what ultimately brings her happiness, what brings her purpose, and what makes her feel so prideful every single day. And then as I continued my research, I started seeing these little articles, these stories, and I stumbled upon this Harvard 85-year study. This is the longest study on human development that is in the globe. It started in the Great Depression when Harvard University took a bunch of Harvard sophomores and other people from all around Boston, from the slums to the richest areas, and they started the subject with interviews and data where they compiled things about human development, from what makes them happy, what makes them stressed, what brings them joy, what has a major impact on their life. And the key point out of the whole thing was relationships are the number one thing to happiness. Having a building in your community, feeling you have a purpose was the number one thing to happiness. People who were most satisfied with their relationships, most satisfied with the community in their 50s were the most healthy when they're 80. It didn't matter what their health was. It didn't matter what their genetics say, whether they were alcoholics at 50. It didn't matter. Whether it was the relationships, how purposeful they felt within their communities. As the head of this project, current head, as this has been going on for 85 years, Dr. Robert Waldron has said, loneliness kills. It's as harmful to the body and soul as alcoholism. So I connected this greater project to the purpose of my project as a whole. And I saw that the overall structure of this study in itself relates totally to what these people believe in, the key foundations of community, purpose, and pride. I noticed that all 7 people that I interviewed, they were all incredibly happy people, and they spoke with some sort of joy, some sort of energy, pride that rubbed off on me as I spoke with them. They went on I only intended for some of these interviews to be 15, 20 minutes, and then later than I know, it's an hour and 30 in their office, and I'm starting to get really thirsty, and they keep talking, and they're very long-winded because they get hyped up about this stuff. They love talking about their community, love talking about where they come from, and it's all in their relationships. They treat every single person that's within the tribe like a brother, like a sister, and it's really a powerful element that really is showed with the data in this study. Another thing I missed on that I think is really important is that the subjects within the study, it didn't matter their wealth, their fame. A lot of them who grew up in the slums of Boston actually turned out being the happiest people, the people who lived the longest, while the people who lived in the richest parts of Boston grew up, turned to alcoholism, drug abuse, because all they were looking for was fame. All they were looking for was money in life. And as they aged, as that stuff ran out, they found depression. They found a lot of stuff that you don't often look for, whether it was the people in the slums that were the happiest. This connection, this interview with Mr. Matthew Morgan was the most important to me as a whole. My parents will 100% laugh at this, but in freshman year, sophomore year, I did not think I was going to move home, like at all. I thought I was going to go to college and then end up in Chicago, New York, someplace with great opportunity, someplace that was a lot more beautiful than the place we are at, with beaches, whatever. And I didn't really realize the significance of what home really means. And after talking to him, he talked about how Mr. Matthew Morgan is a wonderful person. He was a lawyer, and he's an incredible lawyer. He had opportunities to go to Washington, opportunities to go to Minnesota, Chicago, that were for much higher pay. But he stayed in Oklahoma City for a purpose, for something greater than himself. And that's why he has stayed for 35 years with the tribe, working in one specific job. He said, I could live anywhere in the world, but why would I? My people are here, this is home, this is where I want to see succeed. That's what drives him every day through work. When he shows up to the office, he knows he's at a place he will work as hard as he can because he knows that he's benefiting people, something greater than himself. So that's something I turned to as I was driving home, as I was writing these papers, is that when you kind of look forward, it seems there's so much opportunity somewhere else. So there's so many opportunity in all these places. When we really look at it, when you go to these places, if you do become successful, you do have happiness, there's not as much purpose in that. I mean, I can't tell you a place I want to see succeed more than Oklahoma City. And only a couple years ago, I was thinking about abandoning that. So, I mean, I'm still young. I could go anywhere in this world, but almost as time goes on, I'm starting to realize that, maybe there's a purpose, something greater than yourself, in living and coming back to where you find as home, where you find as your spot, and not chasing the opportunities you have, not chasing the money, the higher money, and not chasing the fame. I'll end off this presentation with this quote by Mr. Matthew Morgan that he ended off his thing with, is everybody's rich for different reasons. Whether you have money, whether you have a large family, whether you have culture, language, or family, we're very proud. The tribes are incredibly proud, as I said. They are some of the most proud people that I've talked to, and as I said, it resonates off them within their, whenever I talk to them. And it's 100% sure that they are, even though they're not rich in money, all these people, and they're not living in penthouses in New York, they're not living in Beverly Hills, but honestly, they're probably more rich in the stuff that's true to yourself than a lot of people living in those places that I described, because they have a place they really care about, they're working for something bigger than themselves, and every single time they put their head down at night, they know that they're in something, they're working for something that's bigger than just a checkbook, bigger than just being on a cover of a magazine. So I want to end off this interview with a bunch of thank yous, especially to Mr. Castle and Mr. Lyons, my sponsors. Mr. Castle helped a lot on the formatting side of this, while Mr. Lyons helped a lot on the artsy side, and I'm very appreciative of that. I want to thank the ISP group as a total, Ms. Davis, for giving me the opportunity. I didn't just learn a lot about the tribes, a lot about my history with this. I learned a lot about myself through much reflection and through looking back on all these interviews. And then most importantly, I want to thank my parents, especially my mom, because first of all, she kind of came up with the idea of turning this project, this idea of what I wanted to do, into something bigger than myself. But also with a lot of these interviews, when I was having trouble to interview, as I was talking to Dr. Thurston earlier in the gallery, it was, she was the one that was like, you got to get out there. If you want to get these interviews, you got to go and do it. And you can't just sit and write emails all day. So I'm very appreciative for her and for everybody that helped me along the way. So thank you guys, and have a good night.
Hello again. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Adam Alberini this evening. The topic of his research, the impact of social media use on high school male athletes, perfectly reflects who he is as a student and as a person. Observant, thoughtful, and deeply attuned to the experiences of his peers. In taking on this project, he set out to explore an issue that has gained national attention from psychologists, coaches, educators, and families alike. His findings offer meaningful insight into how social media shapes the confidence, performance, and overall well-being of young male athletes, and they contribute to a growing conversation about how best to support students both on and off the pitch. You like that soccer term? Throughout this process, Adam has demonstrated diligence and persistence. When obstacles arose during data collection, he met them with creativity and determination. I'm incredibly proud of the work that he has accomplished as a researcher and a scholar. Even more, I'm inspired by the character he displays. His willingness to use his work to better understand and uplift others is exactly the type of leadership our world needs. Adam has achieved so much during his time at Heritage Hall. If his work here is in any indication, he'll step into the future with purpose, lifting others up, asking thoughtful questions, and pursuing challenges with the same dedication that has defined his time with us. Please join me in welcoming Adam Alberini.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Lyons, for that incredible speech. That really means a lot to me, and thank you all, my audience, for being here tonight. My name is Adam Alberini, and just like all my other peers that have presented today, I'm a senior at Heritage Hall. And speaking of my peers, I want to congratulate all of you on your amazing presentations. I thought that you all did a fantastic job, and I'm sure the audience here can agree. And so now it's finally my turn to present. And so without further ado, let's get started because we have a lot to cover, to be honest. So the title of my study is The Social Emotional Effects of Social Media on the Athletic Performances of Male High School Student Athletes. My research is composed of a literature synthesis and an exploratory data analysis. Here is the layout of the presentation I'll be sharing with you all today. First, we'll begin with the introduction, then we'll move on to the psychological impacts, then the hypotheses, then I'll be giving a brief explanation of what Spearman's row is, then we'll be looking at the methodology and results, and then the discussion, and lastly, I'll be giving out my acknowledgments. Social media has never been more prevalent in the lives of teens than in the current day. With the rise of cell phones, the internet, and the constant mobile connectivity that results from the two, many teenagers spend several hours a day on social media. According to the APA, the American Psychological Association, the average teenager spends around 4.8 hours a day on social media platforms including YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat. Additionally, according to the same source, the abundant usage of social media has shown to have psychological impacts on well-being. And so, as a teenager, a researcher, a male high school student athlete, and a social media consumer, I wanted to explore how will the social emotional effects of social media have an impact on the athletic performances of male high school student athletes. That's my research question. Of the many psychological impacts that social media has on the overall well-being of present-day teens, these 6 have shown to be the most prevalent. Sleep deprivation is associated with reduced concentration, memory privation, and daytime fatigue. Anxiety and depression are associated with worry, fear, unease, hopelessness, sadness, loss of interest, and/or pleasure in activities. The fear of missing out, otherwise known as FOMO, is associated with compulsive behaviors to maintain social connections. And confidence and self-esteem. So these two are unique in the sense that they can be both negatively and positively impacted by social media through social interaction and self-expression. And so, having researched to discuss the psychological impacts of social media on the overall well-being of present-day teens, and wanting to further explore the research question, 2 hypotheses were formed in order to explore potential correlations between social media usage and athletic performance indicators. The first hypothesis predicted that as social media usage in minutes increases, minutes played in varsity game will decrease. And the second hypothesis predicted that as social media usage in minutes increases, self-rated performance and satisfaction will decrease. In statistical terms, I hypothesize that there will be a negative Spearman's correlation between both social media usage and minutes played, as well as between social media usage and self-rated performance and satisfaction. In order to explore these hypotheses, an exploratory repeated cross-sectional design was implemented and an exploratory data analysis was conducted. So what even is Spearman's correlation? It's a non-parametric correlation coefficient that measures the strength and direction of a monotonic relationship between 2 variables based on rankings rather than raw data. And so as shown here with data table 1, raw data is converted into ranked data. And so if you look at the farthest left column, just to give you guys some examples of values, we see values of 0, 15, 35, and 180. And so these values are converted into ranks of 1, 2, 3, and 4 respectively. And so this is done for all the raw data. And so all the raw data is converted into ranked data, and all the ranked data is put into this formula that we see here on the right. And through this formula, we'll be getting Spearman's correlation value. So what does the Spearman's correlation value mean, and how do we interpret it? Well, the value will typically be a decimal, though in some cases it can be an integer. And the value will always lie between -1 and 1. And so if the value lies in between 0 and 1, that means that obviously it's going to be a positive value, and so therefore there will also be a positive correlation between two variables being measured. And so, additionally, as illustrated by the increasing magnitude of the lines, the closer the value is to 1, the stronger the correlation. So for example, if we have values of 0.2 and 0.8, the value of 0.8 will have a 4 times stronger correlation between two variables being measured than 0.2 will, because obviously 0.8 is 4 times closer to 1 than 0.2 is. And so this exact same logic is used for if the values lie in between 0 and -1, except obviously now we're dealing with negative values, and so therefore we'll also be dealing with negative correlations. And so in relation to my hypotheses, negative Spearman correlation values would support both of my hypotheses. My design was a non-experimental, correlational, repeated cross-sectional design, so in my study there were surveys, and these surveys were sent over a 6-week period during competitive soccer season. Participants consisted of members of a private high school soccer team, and social media usage in minutes played in a varsity game, and self-rated performance satisfaction, all that were measured. All analyses were exploratory and intended to identify patterns rather than establish causal relationships. They intended to identify patterns through Spearman correlation values. And so here are the results of my studies. And so data table 1 on the left here shows the raw and ranked data values for social media usage in minutes versus self-rated performance and satisfaction. And data table 7 on the right there shows all the raw and ranked data values for social media usage in minutes versus minutes played in a varsity game. I'd like to mention to all of you tonight that unfortunately, because of time management purposes, we will not be able to look at all 12 tables and 26 graphs that this research has produced. And so therefore, in this presentation, we'll only be looking at the results from week 1, plus the 2 graphs at the end that shows all the correlation values over the 6 weeks. And so here are the graphs that essentially visualize the data shown in data table 1 on the left right here. And so on the left, the graph with the red visual cues, we have basically a graph that shows us the raw data, and on the right, the graph with the blue visual cues, we have a graph that shows us the ranked data. And so all the ranked data that we see here in the graph on the right was put into Spearman's correlation formula, and through that formula we got a value of -0.243, which essentially means that for week 1, between social media usage in minutes and self-rated performance and satisfaction, there was a weak negative correlation. Additionally, I'd like to point out that self-rated performance and satisfaction was entered on a scale of 1 to 10, while my other 2 measures were typed in by respondents. And so here we have 2 graphs that essentially visualize the data shown in data table 7 on the right here. And so again, we're looking at the raw and ranked data values. So the graph on the left shows with the red visual cues shows us the raw data, and the graph on the right with the blue visual cues shows us the ranked data. And so all the ranked data that we see here in the graph on the right with the blue visual cues was essentially put into Spearman's correlation the Spearman's correlation formula, and through that formula we got a value of 0.364, which essentially means that between social media usage in minutes and minutes played in the varsity game for week 1, there's a weak to moderate positive correlation. And so as mentioned earlier, here are the 2 graphs that essentially show us all the Spearman correlation values calculated for over the 6 weeks. And so figure 5 on the left shows us the Spearman's correlation values calculated over the 6 weeks for social media usage in minutes versus self-rated performance and satisfaction. And the graph on the right, figure 6, shows us the Spearman correlation formulas for social media usage the Spearman's correlation values over all the 6 weeks for social media usage in minutes versus minutes played in a varsity game. So if we go back, we're looking at figure 5 again. If we go back 2 slides, we see that the first value calculated for week 1 was -0.243. And so if we go to the graph on the left, figure 5, we see that the first value there is going to be -0.243, because again, we're counting for all 6 weeks, right? And so week 2 had a correlation of 0.325, week 3, -0.23, and so on and so on. And so figure 6, right, we go back 1 slide, we see that the first value for week 1 was 0.364. And so if we go back to figure 6, the first data point there is 0.364, and the second 0.23, the third -0.51, and so on and so on, because we're counting for all 6 weeks now. And so we'll be visiting these graphs again later. My research question for this study was, how will the social emotional effects of social media have an impact on the athletic performances of male high school student athletes? Hypothesis 1 predicted that as social media usage in minutes increases, minutes played in a varsity game will decrease. And hypothesis 2 predicted that as social media usage in minutes increases, self-rated performance and satisfaction will decrease. Essentially, both hypotheses predicted that social media and the social emotional effects that stem from it will have an overall negative impact on the athletic performances of male high school student athletes. And so, as shown in figures 5 and 6, the strength and direction of the correlation values varied across weeks. In relation to my hypotheses, based on these two graphs alone, it can be inferred that the correlation values for some weeks supported my hypotheses, while the correlation values for other weeks rejected my hypotheses. Figures 5 and 6 depict mixed and inconsistent patterns, and because of the small varying weekly samples, like for example, how week 1 had 13 responses, and week 5 had as little as 4 responses, right? So because of the small varying weekly samples, and the use of repeated cross-sectional design with subjective and external measures, rather than a longitudinal design with objective measures, right? So instead of asking athletes to self-report their social media usage minutes, we should have definitely asked athletes to send us a screenshot of their smartphone screen time analytics, right? So because of those limitations, correlations cannot be interpreted as evidence of a reliable or causal effect, but rather as exploratory indicators to highlight possible relationships. To summarize, although the correlation values for some weeks supported and aligned with the predicted negative associations, the overall pattern of the results is too inconsistent to substantiate the hypotheses, and instead suggests that any correlation between social media usage and athletic performance in this context is tentative, variable, and further dependent on factors beyond the scope of this study. I would now like to take this time to give out my acknowledgments. Thank you, Dr. Lyons, for encouraging me, believing in me, and sticking with me throughout this entire project. There were certainly times throughout this research where I truly doubted myself and I really believed that I couldn't get the job done. But with Dr. Lyons, her being the incredible supportive person that she is, she really encouraged me, supported me, and spent so much time and effort to meet with me just to make sure that I was on the right track and to help me write and come up with ideas for my project. And so I'm really grateful to Dr. Lyons for mentoring me and guiding me throughout this entire research process. And I know that I hit the jackpot with choosing Dr. Lyons to be my advisor. So yeah, thank you, Dr. Lyons. Thank you to Dr. Thurston, who helps me tremendously with the statistics of my paper. Dr. Thurston is truly a genius, a great teacher, she's a great person in general. And I'm really thankful to have received help from her regarding the statistical portion of my paper. If there's one regret I have with my research is that I didn't consult with Dr. Thurston any sooner, because I know that if I had, my research findings could have been a whole lot stronger. So yeah, thank you, Dr. Thurston. Thank you to Dr. Hamill. Oh, where is he? Oh, there he is. Thank you to Dr. Hamill, who really encouraged me and pushed me to begin this research. I remember in late January of this year, whenever Mrs. Davis announced that us juniors could sign up to do an ISP, I remember originally thinking to myself that there was going to be no way that I was going to take so much time and effort to write a 20-page research paper. Yeah, well, when Dr. Hamill heard that I was not going to be doing an ISP, I don't want to expose him on stage, but let's just say that he had a little bit of a fit. I don't recall what it was exactly that he said to me that day, but what I do know is that whatever he said to me that day really encouraged me and pushed me to begin this research and to stand in front of you all today on the big stage and to give out this presentation. So yeah, thank you, Dr. Hamill. Thank you to Mrs. Davis, who's in charge of the Independent Studies program and who gave all of us presenting today the opportunity to present today. I'm really grateful to Mrs. Davis for administering this program, and not just that, but for also being there for all of us ISP scholars whenever we had any questions and needed any help. Mrs. Davis really took the time and effort to schedule and write down all of those meetings and benchmarks that we had, just so that us ISP scholars could be put on the path to success. I know I said that Dr. Hamill pushed me to begin this research, but the fact is that without Mrs. Davis, there would be no research for Dr. Hamill to even push me into doing. So yeah, thank you, Mrs. Davis. Thank you to my coaches, Coach Riley and Coach Hernandez, for encouraging and pushing my team to actually respond to my surveys. It's true that my sample sizes were unorthodoxly small, but without you two, they would have been even smaller. Thank you to my team, who actually took the time and effort to respond to my surveys. You all made up a huge portion of my research, and without you all, there would be no statistics in my paper whatsoever. I know I didn't include them on here, but I want to thank my family, specifically my parents, for enduring and withstanding all of those 4 a.m. rehearsals, 90% of which turned violent, unfortunately. But I want to thank my family for enduring and supporting me throughout this entire research process. And lastly, I want to thank you all, my audience, for your time tonight and for being here and for sticking with me throughout this entire presentation. I know I threw a lot of you guys tonight, and so I'm really grateful to you all that you stuck with me to the very end of this presentation. And so yeah, thank you all, and that's all that I have.
Thank you all. You don't have to hear another speech from me, but thank you all for being here. Can we give one more round of applause to our ISP students? What they did this year is not easy, and I thank you guys guys for letting us be a part of the beginning of your story. I hope you continue to be curious and break barriers in your respective fields that you choose to do. There's nothing you can't do. So thank you again for being here. Please take some flowers on your way out. And thank you again. Take your time leaving, but thank you. Mr. Fetcher is now, are you going to call it Ice Day tomorrow, or should we sleep here? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. All right, thank you guys. Please drive home safely. Thank you again for being here. Congratulations.